Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I am recording this on November 21st. The market hasn't opened up yet, but it will soon. So we're going to go over the market. We're going to go over a little bit of the news and give you my perspective on what's going on. Just a reminder, the number of cases in the United States for normal influenza during the cold season is down relative to last year. And also the cases for SARS-CoV-2 are down relative to last year, just a little bit. What is up in the United States is obviously bird flu, all right? The avian flu with farmers exposed to cattle and poultry. There was a case of swine, if I remember. I think there was one case, but it's pretty much just farm workers. There's no human-to-human transmission. Now, cases that are up for the general public are mycoplasma pneumonia. And that's very problematic for individuals that are younger and older, all right? The number of cases are higher relative to last year. So let's just keep that in mind. It's been relatively warm in the United States for this cold season, which starts in around September, end of August, beginning of September, and doesn't end until about March. So I suspect that we'll have additional cases of influenza and SARS-CoV-2 probably in the end of December, early January. That's what I think there's going to be. I don't think it's going to be big, but I think there's going to be a blip up of cases. But the mycoplasma pneumonia is going to be problematic, all right? This is what they were calling white lung in China. And what it basically is walking pneumonia, all right? So you may not even know that you have it. And, the problem is there are many versions of this floating around that are resistant to antibiotics. So those are just the cursory look at the landscape of what's potentially happening during the cold season in the United States. Help support my work by making sure that you subscribe to all my channels. I have 4 channels on YouTube. I have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. I do get strikes on YouTube, but I do premieres on a regular basis, so you can, be in the live chat. And please help support my work by sharing the links, by asking your social media to follow me. You can follow me on X and GETTR. I have 2 channels on X and 1 channel on GETTR. Also, follow me on Apple Podcasts and Podomatic. You can listen to my audio podcasts on those. I also have a link in the description of this video and all my videos to join my WhatsApp group. And I post links and some important information there. So you can join the WhatsApp group. So there's many ways to interface just in case certain platforms go down for whatever reason. So it's really important to do that. And help support my work by donating. You can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or buy me a coffee on my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com. On the homepage at the very bottom, you can donate. You can also be a paid member to my Patreon channel. Patreon is a great way to be able to help support my work because most of the videos I do, thousands and thousands of videos that I do are for free. And it's through the individuals buying on the website and donating and, being paid members on Patreon that help me do this for free. I give you information about the economy, geopolitical environment, domestic issues, that are happening in the United States politically, or you know, even with our civil liberties, and you know, other aspects to current events and the economy and all this stuff. So I give you quite a bit of information, and your health, how to improve your health, and things that I have done to slow down the aging process and to improve my, you know, my different systems, you know, cardiovascular system and brain function and whatnot. So please help support my work by donating, by being a paid member, and sharing the links and asking your social media to follow me. So with that said, let's take a look at CNN. CNN has a video here about the Ukraine strikes.
Russia using 8 long-range U.S. missiles. That is what 2 defense
Come on. Hold on, technical difficulties.
ammunition depot deep inside Russia using 8 long-range U.S. missiles. We are now learning that Ukraine has successfully hit an ammunition depot deep inside Russia using 8 long-range U.S. missiles. That is what 2 defense U.S. officials are telling our Oren Lieberman tonight. Russia claims the Ukrainian attack did not cause damage. The U.S. says that it's false. But Ukraine also reportedly used British-made Storm Shadow missiles for the first time today inside Russia as well. Heard them right there in that video. You can see the background, but you can hear the explosions. Weapons expert telling CNN those are exactly the types of sounds and blasts you would expect to hear from those Storm Shadow missiles. It comes as Russia is now mass producing nuclear-resistant mobile bomb shelters. The shelters can protect against shockwaves and radiation from a nuclear blast, among other threats. While on Russian state TV, one popular host suggesting that the world is now on the verge of another world war.
As President Putin has repeatedly stressed, missile strikes deep inside Russian territory will change the nature of the conflict, its very essence, and be a radical escalation. After all, the USA, England, and France will be directly entering a war with Russia, with all the ensuing consequences for their own territories.
This comes as a number of American allies are now accusing Russia of sabotaging crucial fiber optic internet cables in the Baltic Sea. The cables connecting Sweden to Lithuania and Germany to Finland were cut on Sunday and Monday. And we are now learning that around the time that this happened, that a Chinese ship sailing from Russia was in that area. Nick Peyton Walsh is out front tonight in Kyiv.
Ukrainian special forces fighting up close and taking prisoners. Rare footage of them still inside Russia's Kursk region. But British Storm Shadow missiles were claimed to have hit Wednesday. These fragments found by locals. Just hours earlier, American-supplied ATACMS missiles also plowed into Russia, marking a stark new escalation in the war. Yet it was also in Kiev that fear grew. The US Embassy closing here for the first time since the invasion, citing a threat of air attack.
It's a reflection of the heightened tension here felt in the capital Kiev. It's been under regular bombardment for over 2 months, but other European allied embassies are also limiting their function today. Perhaps a sense across NATO here that we're entering a new chapter of this conflict.
Kiev braced for another sleepless night of sirens, the bereaved planted flags into this sea of loss in central Kiev. Anya's father died of his injuries 3 weeks ago after 5 months in a coma. She is raw from both the talk of peace and fear of sirens.
Так страшно, як сьогодні тут. Я вам скажу чесно, ми сьогодні під кожним кругом ходили в укриття, бо було дійсно дуже страшно. Не хочеться якось завдавати шкоди нашій країні. Хочеться просто, щоб все було як було раніше, але без російського всього цього.
But it's never over in Kiev. The air raids intensifying in the past 2 months, and the weekends seen here the worst for a while. So the heightened anxiety behind several NATO embassies reducing operations this day sparks Ukrainian officials to plead they hold their nerve and deride this piece of Russian misinformation online, the detailed and fake warning of wide-scale attacks. This situation should be interpreted, he says, as Russia's attempt to use any elements of psychological influence. They have one instrument, which is to scare. This has always been a classic element of Russian politics, so I'd like our partners to be more careful as to the information coming from Russia.
These mushrooms make you feel better. They increase focus and energy while keeping you calm and stress-free. Plus, they cut down on bloat and heal your gut.
What we saw today with that very explicit, specific US embassy closure and warning is a reflection, I think, of the fear of escalation around Ukraine. The misinformation the Russians are blamed for by Ukrainian officials, well, it was a fake, a pretty bad fake, frankly. Is that the only thing that caused this US embassy warning? I doubt it, personally, and I think it feeds into a fear here, as I say, of a new chapter. US-made, UK-made missiles being fired by Ukraine into Russia. That's something that Vladimir Putin is probably going to want to respond to, and certainly Kiev is on edge because of that.
All right, Nick, thank you very much. And I want to go out front now to Evelyn Farkas, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia and Ukraine, along with the retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, former Commanding General of the U.S. Army in Europe. So, Evelyn, these missiles that we heard Storm Shadows right in that audio clip, but also now U.S. ATACMS being used deep inside Russia on that ammo depot, as we understand in the most recent use. How does this tangibly change things? Does it tangibly accomplish anything right now for Ukraine?
Well, I think, Aaron, it puts pressure on the Russian government because the more of these ammunition depots that the Ukrainians can take out, that obviously means that they have less munitions, which means their time is shorter. The other thing is that it disrupts their logistics operations, and that also provides in the short term an advantage to the Ukrainians. So it may not be a deal changer just to take out 1 or 2 ammunition depots, but it's certainly disruptive on the battlefield right now in the short term.
General Hodges, Russia State TV talking about World War III, Putin making comments about nuclear weapons, and now they're sort of mass producing these mobile nuclear resistant bomb shelters, right, that we have video of. What do you see here? What do you think such a thing is about?
Well, I think this is classic Kremlin scaremongering. I mean, I have to give them credit for the new thing of the new bunkers that they'll be selling. The Russians know that Washington and Berlin and London and other capitals react to this, that we're vulnerable to this scaremongering. But if you think about it, why would Russia use a nuclear weapon? I mean, there is no benefit for Russia to use a nuclear weapon. None. Their benefit comes from the way we deter ourselves out of fear that they might use a nuclear weapon. China, India have both told Russia, do not use a nuclear weapon. The United States has said you will suffer catastrophic consequences if you use a nuclear weapon. So there's no benefit on the ground or strategically for Russia. So, of course, you take it serious because they have thousands. They don't care how many people they kill, including their own. But there are only downsides for Russia if they actually do it.
And when it comes to at least some sort of a pressure campaign appears to be on Europe to turn on this war, if not just simply a more broader escalation or Putin making it clear, that he wants to extend Russian dominance. I mentioned earlier those 2 undersea cables that were mysteriously cut. The German defense minister says that nobody believes they were accidentally severed. And then you had that Chinese ship with apparently a Russian captain, which was, seen in the area around the time that this occurred. What do you think happened?
Well, it seems likely, Aaron, that the Chinese ship did this at the behest of the Russian government. Whether the Chinese government was involved or not, I can't say. But this is a continuation. I just came back from Ukraine just before our elections. In the fall and in the summer, Russia was conducting sabotage operations all over Europe. The German intelligence agency heads were warning that the Russians were conducting these operations, that Russia was getting ready for some sort of operation potentially against NATO allies. So they were raising the sirens. We weren't paying that much attention to it. So the sabotage operations are part of this overall campaign to intimidate.
General Hodges.
Yes,
Oh, about the cables. What do you think that was Putin?
I'm sorry. Yeah, of course. The Russians are at war with us, even if we don't think of ourselves being at war with them in the traditional sense. You know, we used to use this phrase hybrid war, which is really unhelpful and unuseful. The Russians are at war with us, whether it's disinformation, missiles flying through Polish airspace, Latvian airspace, Romanian airspace, sabotage. I'm glad my friend Evelyn used the word sabotage. That's what's going on all over Europe. They're pushing us to find out where our limits are. So until we finally change our mindset and acknowledge that the Russians are at war, not armed attacks, so not Article 5 stuff, but they are at war. Until we inflict some kind of pain on them, their behavior is never going to change. And so we have to get serious about economic sanctions and helping Ukraine defeat Russia.
And we'll see what happens here, of course, at least what the incoming president has indicated, right, is a negotiated settlement, possible end to all those sanctions and a complete about face and all of this. But well, let's see. All right, thank you both very much. I appreciate it.
It's getting a bit scary because there can be a miscalculation on either with a nation within NATO, in the European theater, or Russia or the United States, where something happens where it involves a nuclear detonation. Risks are elevating. Now, when you look at the market, you know, the futures for VIX right now is still, at 15. That's low. So you're not seeing risk in the market to think that there's going to be further escalation in Europe. So this may be something that is just a flare up and that it'll calm down and perhaps there'll be some sort of peace agreement after Trump gets into office in January. It's possible, but just risks are building up where a nuclear detonation may happen. And my worry is that the national security state under a Trump administration is going to lose power. It's going to be restructured. Well, a great way to try to maintain power and to hamstring the Trump administration is to have some sort of nuclear detonation that takes place in Europe, where they demand, where the national security state tries to convince the American public and Congress to give them authority and not to restructure. I wouldn't be surprised that they orchestrate something to try to maintain power and not lose agency power over the executive branch. So they have gained, the national security state gained power after 9/11. They don't want to relinquish that power. And if Trump gets what he wants, there's going to be a major restructuring in the national security state. So are we seeing some sort of orchestrated play taking place in Europe to give the national security state power, prevent Trump from restructuring the national security state? Because it's going to be a lot harder to restructure the CIA, the FBI, and the Pentagon and all these agencies and the military under news announcements of tactical nukes being used by Russia. There's no way that Trump is going to be able to restructure the national security state if that happens. I'm concerned. There is a significant probability that the national security state is trying to poke the bear to get a tactical nuke to go off to maintain power and not be restructured during the Trump administration. Very worrisome.
Oh, and just to Nick's point there, not the only major policy shift that we've seen from the United States, the first being the use of the longer range missiles now to attack inside Russia, but also now the decision to supply anti-personnel mines to Ukraine as well. And of course, we've seen an increase in funding for munitions and military hardware. I know some part of that was announced in the September surge that the administration announced. Just explain to us what we're seeing and what's new.
So in terms of the package that was...
If a man wears this, he's definitely getting lucky tonight.
Most jeans are either super baggy, too stiff, or have a terrible wash. But there is nothing.
So in terms of the package that was just announced with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on a trip in the Pacific, that is effectively more of the same, $275 million in military aid to Ukraine. It's not a large number as we've seen before, and there still are billions in aid the administration needs to get out before January 20th here, so just a couple of months left. The anti-personnel mines, certainly an interesting decision here. The U.S. hadn't provided those in the past. Instead, the U.S. had agreed to provide anti-tank mines and has given those to Ukraine since pretty much the very beginning. But the U.S. effectively looked at the situation and saw that even though Russia wasn't advancing quickly, their attacks with large numbers of forces suffering large casualties was gradually, slowly, and brutally paying off, wearing away at Ukrainian defensive lines. And that's one of the reasons the administration decided to give Ukraine anti-personnel mines to be able to slow the event.
All right, so the market did open up, and as you can see on the dashboard, for the ones that are watching on the dashboard, the S&P 500 is at 5,930. Again, my target for year end is anywhere from 5,800 to 6,000, maybe even 6,100. The VIX is at 16, so it's low risk. And the Euro USD trade is trading at 1.052. Oil is WTI oil is trading below $70 a barrel at the moment. So right now, you know, it seems somewhat stable, but let's see what happens in the news here. Hold on. I'm concerned about what's going on in Ukraine here in this escalation ladder
of these Russian forces here. The goal, according to U.S. officials, is that most of these, or rather the intention perhaps, is that most of these will be used in eastern Ukraine, and that's where Ukrainian forces face that brutal Russian assault that they hope to slow down. Ukraine has given assurances, according to U.S. officials, that it will use them only within Ukrainian territory and will be very careful to make sure these don't risk injury to civilians. And that, of course, is the major concern here. That, a couple of years ago, is why the Biden administration said it would no longer create, export, supply, or store anti-personnel mines, with the exception of the Korean Peninsula, because of all of those concerns. But in looking at the situation and realizing the challenges Ukrainian forces face, the administration has decided to supply those at what is effectively an incredibly late stage of the war, and even later stage of the Biden administration. And as you pointed out, it comes with that policy change on the use of U.S. long-range missiles. The goal, and I'll just pick up on the last point Nick made here, perhaps to leave Ukraine in as strong a position as possible if President-elect Donald Trump comes in and tries to push for immediate negotiations.
And I think that's the point, Owen. I wonder what discussion is taking place there, if any, of what the Europeans are also doing. There's obviously been these reports that the British-supplied Storm Shadow missiles are now being used by the Ukrainians in Russia as well. And I'll emphasize that's reports. But are you hearing anything about that? And perhaps that the Europeans are also loosening some of the restrictions and ties, along with what they're saying from the US administration, exactly to the point that you're reiterating and that Nick made, that perhaps it's about providing Ukraine with the strongest position they can be in to see what happens with the next administration.
Well, the U.S. has tried to move in lockstep with its NATO allies, so it wouldn't be surprising at all to see the UK allow for the use of storm shadows, just as the U.S. allows for the use of the long-range attackers. Now, not all NATO countries have shifted in unison on this. Germany continues to say it will not provide its own long-range Taurus missiles to Ukraine. So you see, there are disagreements, there is friction here, and we've seen that in the past, for example, with the provision of tanks to Ukraine. So perhaps not too surprising there. In terms of preparing for what this might look like under President-elect Donald Trump, we have already seen the U.S. begin to shift some of that, and to make this, instead of a U.S.-focused effort to assist Ukraine, to make it more of a NATO-focused effort, to effectively create a situation where it can't just fall apart. It will continue, and it has the infrastructure to do so. That has been, over the past several weeks and months, a major effort of the U.S.
Yes, and it remains to be seen how Russia responds to this. Aaron, great to have you. Thank you. Aaron Lieberman there, and of course, Nick Payton-Walsh too, in Kyiv.
The U.S. Embassy in Ukraine's capital of Kyiv is temporarily closed and warning Americans there of a potential.
According to CNBC, there's jobless claims come in at lower levels since April. Now, the S&P 500 is selling off a little bit here, and that's probably based on the news. Now, because jobless claims are lower, so that would mean that maybe the Federal Reserve might not cut rates. So that might be a Federal Reserve rate cut. Not cutting might be the reason. Now, if you look at the dashboard, you can see the VIX, which is risk, is really going up now. So it's at 17. It's still relatively low in absolute terms, but in relative terms, from the after hours trading, it is elevated. Right. So the CNBC just announced that Fed needs to think of the slow rate of layoffs when thinking about rate cuts. So the job market is still relatively strong, signaling that the Federal Reserve may not want to raise rates. This is what I was saying in previous episodes on my show here. The Federal Reserve cutting rates was too soon. Why? Because the unemployment rate is below natural unemployment rate. So there's too many people employed relative to the natural unemployment rate. In addition, inflation's too high. You don't cut rates when there's too many people employed and inflation is above the 2% mark target. So the Federal Reserve, they missed they lowered rates too soon. And so what's going to happen is that by lowering rates too soon, you're going to have further lower unemployment, so a hotter market with additional increase in inflation. What the Federal Reserve needs to do is really raise rates, but everyone's going to have a shit fit when that happens. Federal Reserve screwed up.
Significant air attack by Russia. Now we're also hearing that Ukraine is warning Russia is staging a, quote, psychological attack on the Ukrainian people by spreading fake warnings of a huge looming airstrike. Back with us now is CNN military analyst, retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Cedric Layton. Take two here. We got started before on this segment. Okay, that was kind of confusing what I just described, because part of this is like a psyop. So what is this assessment that Ukraine has? What do you make of this?
So basically what the Ukrainians are saying is a lot of the material that we see on social media and even in intelligence reports is not correct. Now, the Russians have clearly moved some aircraft around. They are doing some of that as part of a psyops game, probably, but the Ukrainians also have to expect that there will be some targeted areas within Ukraine, and they have to get ready for that. They have to get their defenses ready for those possible attacks.
Yeah, that's been a reality for them. They've seen that lately in earnest on occasion here, right? Okay, let's talk a little bit about this aid that the U.S. is announcing for something kind of controversial, which is not just anti-tank mines, but anti-personnel mines to be used against Russian forces. You had the Secretary of Defense trying to kind of assuage concerns. I don't think they're completely assuaged.
That's probably true because when you have anti-personnel mines, they are different in characteristics from an anti-tank mine. And what's key here is this little fact right here. 160 countries have banned or signed a treaty that bans the use of these mines. Now, these particular mines, the ones that the U.S. is shipping to Ukraine, are actually battery powered, and they, in essence, have a time delay associated with them. They are only active for a certain period that can be set. It can be set for a couple of weeks, or it can be set for just 4 hours. So that's kind of the difference when it comes to that. But that's all part of a big aid package that the U.S. is shipping to Ukraine.
So the idea is that they basically become like dummies after the battery
That is
goes out.
correct. So that will then actually help assuage the concerns of the treaty, and it will also help make it possible for the Ukrainians to move about this area. If they lay mines and then the Russians leave or are forced out of that area, they can possibly use that land once again, as long as they are very careful with how they place these mines.
All right, very good to know. Cedric, thank you so much for taking us through that.
You talk about the test as we move into this new phase of war. When Defense Secretary Austin announced this $275 million in additional support today, he also noted that support to both Ukraine and Israel had really put a strain on the U.S. stockpiles. When you look at that, we look at the budget that Ukraine just passed yesterday, nearly $54 billion, more than a quarter of its GDP, is specifically earmarked for defense spending. Yes, there is still international support, but how much concern is there about how long Ukraine can continue to fund this war?
They can't fund it. They
Well,
need the United
Ukraine
States.
can at least for another 5-7 years. I think that's the intelligence or leaked intelligence estimates from Russia itself. Now, that doesn't mean that's not going to be brutal and people will not die. So I think that you're trading off, or we all are trading off financial support for people's lives. And
There is no way that if the United States decided to stop support, that Ukraine would last more than 1 month. There's no way that they would last more than one month. This thing would die out if the United States stops funding it. You know what this is? This is Afghanistan in the 1980s, where the United States was supporting the Afghanis to fight Russia, but we didn't have the internet. Now we have the internet and social media and lots of, channels like mine pontificating our opinion, right? This is Afghan on YouTube. The Afghan War of the 80s on YouTube. The United States, if they stop the funding, this ends.
Yes, he said, our delays of weapons, they don't matter that much. It's more like Ukraine doesn't have men. But I think that's exactly the point, because if there are delays in weapons, we lose people. That's a real tragedy. So I think we can go on, but the life toll is going to be enormous.
There's no way.
There's
no way. That's total horseshit. That is it's a stalemate right now. Russia isn't doing that great, and nor is Ukraine. But Ukraine is propped up by the United States. There's no way Ukraine would, without support, there's no way they could continue on the war effort. No way.
60 or so days before there is, of course, the inauguration here in the United States, before Donald Trump moves into his second term. He has said he believes, as you know, that he could end this war in 1 day. President Zelensky just a few days ago says he thinks the war will end sooner under Donald Trump. Do you agree? And if so, why?
I actually agree. I think President Trump will have, 6-8 months in the office in the first 6-8 months to achieve as much as possible in foreign policy, including on Ukraine and Russia. Now, it's not going to be 24 hours because, there is an active fight involved with millions of people on each side's armies. So that's impossible to stop over a day. Plus, Russia will pose the demands which will not be acceptable, not even to Ukraine, but also to Europe.
For the ones that are watching the dashboard here, you can see now that the S&P 500 is starting to try to mean revert back to the close of yesterday. So this downward movement that we saw with the news announcement on the jobless claims being lower than expected, then that's starting to get digested in the market. Again, when you have data that's coming in that seems as though the employment rate is the unemployment rate may be too low, it may have the Federal Reserve pause from shorting rates, so lowering rates, right? And the market wants the Federal Reserve to lower the rates. So if anything pauses the Federal Reserve with lowering rates, it's going to be negative for equities, at least in the short run. In the long run, equities are going to be moving up with increased rates or even lower rates. But for intraday trading and swing trading, this type of thing, can be problematic depending on how someone manages their portfolio. But from the economic point of view, from the 50,000 foot level, I personally think that the Federal Reserve lowered rates too quickly because it's really simple. You don't have to have all these fancy economists and all these fancy models. It's really simple. 2% target for inflation. If it's above, you increase rates. And if the unemployment rate is too low, below 5%, the economy is probably too hot. And then you need to raise rates. So inflation, if you have inflation above the 2% and you have employment that's too high, if too many people employed, you need to raise rates. It's that simple. You don't need 100 or 300 economists.
To NATO, so all of that has to be worked out, but it's definitely that a change is coming and an opportunity window will be there.
Timothy Milavanov, it's great to have you here. Really appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
Why is everyone spiraling over YouTube banning ad blockers? Like, chill guys, just use Pi. It's a free Chrome extension that's actually made by one of the founders of Honey, and it basically blocks ads for you. Like, imagine watching YouTube in
Sirens in the Ukrainian capital Kyiv this morning as the U.S. temporarily closes its embassy there and warns of a potential and significant area assault by Russia. But Ukrainian officials say not so fast. Actually, they claim that Russia is playing psychological games here, scaring people in Ukraine with fake warnings of a massive attack. Joining us now is Alex DrPaulCottrell. He's a Ukrainian father who lives in Bitchute. It's a small town in the suburbs of Kyiv, which we've all come to know so well after the Russians invaded it at the beginning of the war and committed mass atrocities there. Alex, first, I just want to talk to you a little bit about this new news and kind of get a civilian's perspective of the U.S. finally granting the ability to Ukrainians to use, the Ukrainian military to use longer range missiles going into Russia. How are civilians, how are you paying attention to this? How are you seeing this?
Thank you, Brianna. That was a great news. Actually, after all the frustrations that we had recently, that was kind of a light that could show some end of the tunnel, that finally we got it. But in the first place, it shouldn't have been provided. I mean, the ban on using long-range weapons to strike into Russian territory. Now we see, the second day, we see how effective they are. We should have had it a long time ago.
And tell us, I mean, a long time ago, this has been going on for so long now. You began this war with a 3-week-old baby, I should mention. You now have another one, an infant, and you are raising children who have only ever really been alive during war. What has this been like for you and your family?
It's been hard, honestly, it's been hard. You have to think about those little kids, you have to think about their future, but how can you do it if the future is so dim? Even now, with the new administration that is coming, it's totally unpredictable. We don't know what they will be doing when they come into office, like in 2 months from now. And this 2 months is going to be a hell, living in this unpredictability. So yeah, we have to think about the kids. We have to raise them, but that's really hard to combine. The thoughts of the kids and hearing the news and trying to survive.
What is your worry about what Trump coming into power will mean for American support for the war and for what that will mean for Ukrainians?
The biggest fear is that they would stop support to Ukraine completely. And that would be the dummiest and the stupidest thing to do. Hopefully it will not happen. But this is the feeling of frustration that I can hear in my fellow citizens' eyes. And I can share it, because the signals are so different that we don't know.
The United States shouldn't be funding this.
We will, trust me, we will continue fighting even without any support. Ukrainians are fearless. Ukrainians, everybody who knows Ukrainians will say, will stay with me. Ukrainians are fearless. We will fight with our fists, with our hands, with our teeth, with our nails, with everything, without any weapons. But we will be evaporated with the time.
They're not going to win if the United States stops the funding. They're not. I mean, it's they may be doing guerrilla warfare type stuff, but it's not going to be anywhere adequate to be able to, to annex, what's already been taken by Russia.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about your hope for your kids? I know they're so little, and I know that it's hard, as you said, to be raising them in war, but you have hopes for their future. What are they?
Well, the thing is, okay, his kids, let's, get the brass tacks here. All right. Hopefully his kids, have a bright future. Most likely they won't, but hopefully they do. All right. But the thing is that look at people in the United States. Why are we funding a war where we can be using those taxpayer dollars to helping children in need in the United States?
I hope they will join the civilized society together with their country. By the way, we have decided that we will not leave this country. Whatever happens, with the worst possible conditions, we will stay in this country with the kids. And we hope that the country will join the European world and the EU and the NATO, and will be protected against such thugs in the future, such terrorists and aggressors. That is my only hope at the moment, and that's what I tell my kids. And we try to create a positive atmosphere for them.
I hope his kids are fine, but you know what? American kids with American tax dollars should be, be afforded a better future before we start funding outside the country. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the probiotics that I have. I have a VeggieCat version, and I also have a powdered version. I take the powdered version. I just mix it with my food. You can mix it with filtered water also. Take it every day. And what this will do is it'll allow you to absorb your nutrients better. You'll have a better metabolism. You're going to have less inflammation in the gut, and you're going to be able to have a better communication between your gut and your liver. That's really important for metabolism and creating bile and all, some very positive things happen when you have a good gut biome. Your skin will improve with a good gut biome. Your hair will improve. Your nails, your eyesight. There's lots of things that happen when you have a good gut. So go to my store, get these great probiotics, take them every day, all right, either the veggie cap form or the powder form, and use them every day, improve your gut and improve your overall health. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. In addition, I also have great, because we're in the cold season, I have great lozenges and drops on my store. So to get some drops, I have it in blueberry. I also have it in cherry and in honey and lemon. All right, get a couple bags. This has structural nanosilver in it. The moment you have an irritation in your throat, take these drops. As the structural nanosilver, it will neutralize the pathogen. It will neutralize the irritant. You will create secretions that will protect the mucosal barrier, right, and reduce further infection. If you do that at the very beginning, you're going to mitigate problems during the cold season. You need a couple bags or a few bags for your household right away, so you can use them when you need them. So please go to my store, get the blueberry, the cherry, and the honey and lemon drops. Honey and lemon drops on my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Be prepared for the cold season. Just be prepared. You're better to be prepared than non-prepared. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. All right. I want to see what Times Radio is saying here about this issue with Russia.
So what's the point to negotiate with a person who is not reliable, who will break, who will violate any kinds of agreements reached? I don't see any point in that, and I'm sure that President Trump very soon will realize this fact.
Sajan, thanks very much for joining us this evening. What's your instant thoughts about the wisdom of the decision to make these defense cuts at this time?
Whilst retiring aging platforms aligns with the UK's military modernization goals, it does potentially introduce interim operational gaps. And then the question also remains, will those gaps be impacted by financial constraints? Ensuring replacements are operational before retiring current assets, I don't think is necessarily going to be the option. So I think it's one of those things to balance between modernization, savings, operational efficiency versus high transition costs, and then capability gaps. So this will be the dilemma and the challenge now.
It's interesting, some of these cuts are to systems and vehicles which are not yet deemed to be out of operational service, and some, like the two large ships, which are well beyond their operational capacity and too old to fix with structural problems, are sort of the sort of thing that you'd expect them to be decommissioning. It's very interesting though that this announcement has been met with the Conservatives saying, well, this is weakening the British defence strength at a crucial time. Do you see any demonstrable weakening just through these announcements, through these projects, through the scrapping of these various items, the drones and the ships and the like?
Well, the Watchkeeper drone, for example, that has faced significant criticism and challenges. It's outdated compared to newer or more effective alternatives, and sometimes there's the issue of performance and operational failures. But the challenge is that there doesn't seem to be any newer drone system that's actually planned. And as we've seen with the war in Ukraine, drones have become an essential feature of warfare, and it's something that the UK will have to adjust to, especially as these drones become more sophisticated and more capable of being in frontline operations.
Yeah, I mean, that drone point is very interesting, and but the rest of it, I mean, you've got some old Chinook helicopters, some Puma helicopters, which have been in service for nearly 50 years, or at least that design of helicopter, the frigates and the amphibious assault ships. I mean, just looking at the amphibious assault ships, HMS Albion and HMS Bulwark, they are used by the Marines, and they don't have any they don't seem to have any immediate alternatives ready. I know the troops can be redeployed, but I mean, you're taking two large assault ships out of operation and not immediately replacing them. We did hear a comment that any nation attempting to or considering to launch a Falkland-style assault could see this as an opportunity to do so. I mean, is that something you'd agree with?
So HMS Albion, HMS Bulwark are the primary vessels for large-scale amphibious operations. Losing them without immediate replacements, that does leave a gap in capability, which could be critical for operations, especially involving the Royal Marines. I think the other aspect that probably hasn't been commented as yet on by anybody is that the decommissioning of these ships could also negatively affect local economies, such as Plymouth, where they are based. And there's also the concern about the impact on naval shipbuilding if replacements are not ordered soon. But the fact is that both of these vessels are old. Maintaining them is expensive, and maybe decommissioning could free up funds for other naval priorities, such as the development of multi-role support ships.
Let's move on to the firing of these Storm Shadow missiles into parts of Russia for the very first time. So this is something that has been a development. We know these missiles have been used before, but the significance of this is that they're being used deep into Russian territory. Do you see any significant response coming in Britain's direction from Moscow as a result of this?
Well, certainly you could expect the Kremlin to raise the volume in terms of their own rhetoric and the threats. And then you've seen that with Vladimir Putin, he has brought forward a policy to lower the threshold of potential nuclear use. So this is the ratcheting up of the strategic calculus that Putin tends to advocate. But keep in mind that this was potentially an inevitability in any case, because the moment President Biden gave the green light for Ukraine to use the Army tactical missile system supplied by the US to strike Russia, it was going to be a case of the UK and other countries then probably giving the green light for their weapon systems to be used to target Russia as well.
Earlier I spoke to Alexander Mereshko, who's a Ukrainian MP. He chairs his country's Committee on Foreign Policy, and he told me what the reaction has been in Kiev to reports of UK-supplied Storm Shadow missiles being used in Russia.
Well, first of all, there hasn't been official confirmation, neither from Ukraine nor from the UK, that it was Storm Shadow or any other kind of Western-produced weaponry. But from our perspective, it is important for Ukraine on the battlefield not to have any restrictions whatsoever with regard to the missiles and all kinds of Western weaponry which we're using to defend ourselves.
How much frustration is there in Kiev about the fact it's taken this long before permission's been given to use these weapons in this way?
I wouldn't say that there is any frustration, because it's better late than never. And we're grateful to the United Kingdom, to the US, to our European partners for all military aid provided. But of course, you know, for us, it's about human lives. And the sooner we receive all the necessary military aid, the more lives we'll be able to preserve and to defend.
I understand the Ukrainian position that you're holding the line against an aggressive state who is determined to overrun you. But do you have concerns now that Donald Trump is heading towards the White House and the slow attritional nature of this terrible conflict, which is exacting such a horrendous toll on your citizens?
Well, we should wait till the new president, Mr. Trump, is sworn in, and when he starts to act, because I more believe in actions, in deeds, rather than words of politicians. And I would give Mr. Trump a chance to prove himself, to show that he's firmly on the right side of history, that he's on the side of the victim of the aggression.
Moscow is making a big show of the change in use or alleged change in use of these Western weapons. Do you expect reprisals?
It's a sign of despair and panic in the Kremlin, because, you know, the very fact that Moscow has had to resort to the aid from North Korea is very telling fact. So Putin doesn't know what to do, but he's bluffing, he's blackmailing, but we shouldn't fall for his bluff, we shouldn't be scared. We should continue to defend ourselves with all means available.
You are on a war footing, and obviously the devastation to your country and to your citizens will be weighing heavily on your mind. But there will be people here further west thinking that the Ukrainian MPs, the Ukrainian leader is talking a good game, but the facts on the ground are such that Russia is still in your territory and it's making advances into your territory. How do you turn this round?
We're trying to do it. We have to be creative. First of all, we need in sufficient quantity and qualities. We need enough Western weaponry, but most importantly, and I believe in this, we need American leadership, which will be followed by our European partners. And we have to be creative on the battlefield. The good example is the Kursk operation, which turned the tables. And also a good example is the fact that we managed to get control over the Black Sea, and Russian Navy had to flee.
If that American leadership is found wanting in the coming months, can you look to Europe with any degree of certainty? Is the European bloc, is Britain strong enough to help Ukraine withstand the Russian assault?
Oh, we have reliable partners, reliable friends like the United Kingdom, like Baltic states, like Poland, and other European countries. So we can count on them, and they have proved being very reliable in terms of Ukraine's support.
What does that actually mean, though, if American leadership and American weapons and American money is not forthcoming under Donald Trump? What do you need from Europe?
Well, honestly, I don't believe that the aid from the United States will stop for a number of reasons. But assuming that if it happens, I still believe that the European partners will not let us down, will not us throw under the bus, so to speak. We can count on them, and we have already strong support and huge material support and military support from these countries.
You are holding a very good line in terms of what you are saying to us, but again, there's that fear that the resolve of the Ukrainians might crumble if you don't get the resources that you need. And it does seem as if there has been a status quo for many, many months now. How do you break that? How do you start taking that fight back to the Russians to win the propaganda war almost as much as the war on the ground?
Well, first of all, we need to survive. We need to retain our statehood, our national identity. And we're talking about the war of attrition. And in such kind of wars, who wins? Not the biggest fighter, but the one who is ready to go to the end, who is determined to survive. And we're survivors. I have no doubt that no matter what, we will continue fighting because we don't have any other option. The other option is surrender and death, and we don't want this to happen to us. So we'll continue to fight against all odds.
What if Donald Trump, when he becomes president, says it's time to talk to Putin, it's time to accept that Russians have taken your territory, which they're not going to give back?
Well, the thing is that Putin is not trustworthy, and we have lots of examples when we had reached agreements with Russia, and all of them were violated, broken by Putin. So what's the point to negotiate with a person who is not reliable, who will break, who will violate any kinds of agreements reached? I don't see any point in that, and I'm sure that President Trump very soon will realize this fact.
And finally, do your countrymen stand behind what you're saying? Do they have the same spirit and ability to continue sustaining losses and continue fighting in the way that you're describing?
According to the recently held polls, Ukrainians are determined to win in a sense that we don't want to sacrifice or to cede our territory, and we don't want to compromise our territorial integrity. So at least the prevailing majority of Ukrainians will continue to fight.
All right, let's want to see here. Zelensky's bargaining chip. Oh.
The fact that the Russians or Vladimir Putin, out of desperation, are turning to countries such as North Korea and Iran to help them in their desperate struggle to win a war against tiny, relatively speaking, Ukraine next door, is a matter of great concern to many in the US who are very critical of Iran.
Let's come on to what the return of Donald Trump to the White House means for Ukraine. Certainly in the build-up to the US election, among Ukraine supporters, there was a certain pessimism about what a Trump presidency would mean for Ukraine. I suspect in recent weeks, I sort of picked up on, I don't know whether it's a bit of bargaining based on the reality of the situation or whether it is actually grounded in reality, but a little more optimism about potentially what a Trump administration might mean, and it wouldn't necessarily mean selling Ukraine out. What is your sense, Lee, of what a Trump presidency may mean for Ukraine in the war?
Undoubtedly, a Trump victory, which we've now seen in the US elections, is not what Ukraine was hoping for. And I'm sure that Vladimir Putin and people in the Kremlin were delighted with that Trump victory, simply because Trump and his supporters have consistently talked about cutting military and economic aid to Ukraine. We saw this between October 2023 and April 2024, that the US stopped providing military support to Ukraine, and that crippled Ukraine's war effort and saw rapid Russian advances. So that threat is extremely concerning to Ukraine. For the reasons that I've already set out, there are glimmers of hope. We can point to Trump being very unpredictable. We can point to Trump not wanting to hand victory to Russia on a plate. But it is quite concerning. And if Trump were to cut military supplies to Ukraine, the question then would be, is the UK and our other friends of Ukraine, such as in the European Union, ready to ramp up their military supplies to meet US shortfalls? And this would be a huge challenge. It would really mean transforming our support. Now, my view on this has always been that should Trump cut supplies to Ukraine, it would still be a really good investment for UK taxpayers and for the UK in general to up our support to Ukraine, because the alternative, letting Russia win this war, would be immensely more dangerous for us. It would create a much more dangerous world where a nuclear-armed, bigger Russia incorporating elements of Ukraine into Russian territory would be a more dangerous adversary, more likely to attack again. And other countries all around the world that have thought, I'd like to invade my neighbor, but I'll never get away with it, will think, actually, I might get away with it. I'm going to invade my neighbor. And the UK would be in a much more dangerous international environment where our defense spending would be orders of magnitude greater than it is now, whereas supporting Ukraine would be relatively cheap compared with that. So I think we have to hope for the best with Trump, but prepare for the worst. And the worst means preparing to up our consistent long-term aid to Ukraine to stop Russia from winning this war.
What have you made of some of the mood music that's come out of the Trump campaign, or now seems to be the Trump administration in recent weeks? I mean, for example, there was this idea of a demilitarized zone, a DMZ between Russia and Ukraine, almost akin to what we have between North and South Korea. Do you think that is in any way feasible?
I'm very concerned about any settlement that freezes the front line where it is now, because that, in effect, means giving Russia victory. Supposing you had a demilitarized zone between what is currently, those parts of Ukraine currently occupied by Russia and the rest of Ukraine, which Russia has not yet managed to invade. Russia would steam ahead with integrating those elements that it has occupied into Russia. You may recall that they've already passed legislation integrating huge swathes of Ukraine into Russia, an area about the size of England. Something like 18% of Ukraine is currently occupied by Russia. So that would be a disaster for Ukraine to freeze the front line where it is now. I've seen suggestions that you could sweeten this pill or take the edge off such a disastrous outcome by saying, first of all, that that land remains part of Ukraine legally, but Ukraine continues to occupy it for the time being. This would be what's known as the East German model, where Western countries never accepted that East Germany was a separate country or that it was going to be part of Russia. I mean, they did eventually, some of them set up embassies in East Berlin, but it was still seen as being part of Germany. And you could do that with Ukraine, where areas occupied by Russia, such as Crimea or eastern Ukraine, were recognized as still being part of Ukraine in a longer term settlement. That's one option. But this would be a very tricky path to go down. And for me, I'm afraid, allowing Russia to keep territory which it has seized by force against international law would not only mean Russia winning this war, but and Putin winning this war, but would also, as I said earlier, make the world a more dangerous place by encouraging other countries suddenly to see, actually, we can invade and occupy our neighbors without long-term consequences.
On that note, in terms of trying to persuade Donald Trump and his administration to be more sympathetic towards Ukraine, do you think one of the stronger arguments that Ukraine allies can make is that, look, Vladimir Putin is aligning himself through the use of Iranian drones, for instance, with Tehran, which is an enemy of America. It is increasingly building an alliance with North Korea and also China. Do you think that is an argument to which Donald Trump and his administration may be more sympathetic? Because very often your sense is, particularly if you read the outlandish tweets, for instance, of Donald Trump Jr., that they see Ukraine as just being this far-flung country in Eastern Europe, which matters little to the average American.
There is always a strong trend or tendency towards isolationism in the US. There's a kind of two tracks of foreign policy within the US. One is to say the rest of the world is a long way away. The US, the United States, has this privileged geographical position where its only land neighbors are Mexico and Canada, and it's a long way from its enemies. So there has always been a trend of thought in the US that all these faraway foreign countries are not our concern. We should leave them to get on with it while we build our own wealth and prosperity at home. And before the First World War, before the Second World War, there were strong schools of thought in the US that the US shouldn't get involved. However, when US interests are threatened, the US does tend to reverse its isolation.
So I get another strike on one of my smaller channels on YouTube on a video that I posted 2 days ago, talking about how, what's going on during the cold season. It's amazing. It truly is amazing. I tell you, the censorship on YouTube is it's so bad, and unfortunately that's where the eyeballs are, So make sure you subscribe to all my channels. I have 4 channels on YouTube. I have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. Please help support my work because I am censored, right? And I'm telling you how to navigate through problems, all right? Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the deodorants that I have. I have great deodorants. I've partnered up with Rainbow Herbals, and we've created these deodorant bars for males and females. They're made from essential oils from the Himalayas, very high quality ingredients. You can get it in citrus and also in peppermint, lavender, and tea tree. These deodorants you would use every day, males or it's for males or females. And also it will help to detoxify your body. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. It's a dual purpose product, and get the deodorants, get a couple bars for your household. They're very high quality. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Now, it's really important to lower inflammation, all right? And you can do that by taking turmeric, which is an antioxidant, but it also can bring down inflammation, and taking ashwagandha root, which helps to control cortisol levels and glucose levels. And by controlling cortisol and glucose levels, you're lowering that inflammatory response. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Improve your cardiovascular health and also your immune system by controlling inflammation. And you can do that by stacking turmeric and ashwagandha together. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the turmeric and the ashwagandha. See, the problem that I'm having with YouTube is they don't want you to hear what I have to say. All right. So I have to put it up, and then I get a strike on one of the channels, and I have to take down all the videos, you know, of that particular episode on the channels on YouTube. So with one strike, because it had a dashboard and a non-dashboard version, with one strike on a channel, it takes down 2 videos, and then I have 4 channels on YouTube, so I have to take down 8. I have to take another 6 videos down because of this one strike. So please support my work. What I have to say is really important. All right. Now, thankfully, there's Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble, and this is why it's so important to subscribe to all my channels. All right. I'm trying to tell you how to navigate and how to improve your health, how to slow down the aging process, how to improve your immune system. They don't want to hear that. People don't. There are people out there that don't want you to hear this information. They're censoring. All right. So help support my work by making sure you subscribe to all my channels and purchase the products that I offer. Help support the channel. Help support my work to inform the public on things they need to be informed. You know, the censorship is bullshit.
Tendency and become involved. We saw this in 9/11, of course, after 9/11, after the attacks on the World Trade Center and on Washington in 2001. Where the US had been saying, well, the Middle East peace process and what happens in the Middle East is really nothing to do with us. And then after those attacks, they provoked the US into becoming very engaged in the Middle East, perhaps not to the benefit of the US or anyone else. And so you're right, James, that the fact that the Russians or Vladimir Putin, out of desperation, are turning to countries such as North Korea and Iran to help them in their desperate struggle to win a war against tiny, relatively speaking, Ukraine next door, is a matter of great concern to many in the US who are very critical of Iran. And you will remember that in the first Trump presidency, President Trump said he would solve the problem of North Korea's nuclear weapons program very quickly. He entered into negotiations with the North Korean leader and even shook his hand in order to show that he was going to make a deal, and didn't get anywhere. And since then, the North Korean nuclear program has continued, and North Korea is becoming more and more aggressive. So it could well be that there will be strategic thinkers in the US who regard Russia's embrace of these pariah states as being sufficiently serious to give them pause for thought in cutting their support for Ukraine. But we can't count on that happening. And in my view, the UK and other countries need to step up their long-term military and economic support to Ukraine to reduce the risk of any cutting of US support, making a Russian victory inevitable.
And just finally, in terms of one of those countries that may hopefully step up, we need to talk about the situation in Germany, because there's been a lot of focus on domestic politics in the US, but of course Olaf Scholz's government in Germany has collapsed and there will be new elections in short order. How significant is that potentially for the future of Ukraine?
It's potentially extremely serious. On the one hand, we can see that Russia is, like Ukraine, in terrible trouble militarily. Of course, Ukraine's under enormous pressure, but so is Russia. Russia is running out of troops, it's running out of equipment, all these tanks and armored vehicles it's been taking out of long-term storage, they're just running out. The Russian economy is in all kinds of trouble. These long-term sanctions are slowly crippling Russia's ability to fight a war. So this is all good On the other hand, Russia has been hoping since launching the war back in February 2022, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, that the alliance of Ukraine supporters, that is the US, the UK, and EU countries, plus some others like South Korea and Japan, Russia has been hoping that that alliance will splinter. And the longer this goes on, this war, the more likely it is that that alliance will splinter, because unlike in Russia, all those countries that are supporting Ukraine are subject to democratic elections. And that means that there is constant pressure on them to come up with new policies or to change their policies. Now, we saw just recently a call from Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, to Putin for the first time that he'd spoken to him, I think, since 2022. And many people saw that as being the German Chancellor responding to pressure from other political parties in Germany, in particular the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, which is a right-wing party, and the Bund Sarah Wagenknecht, which is an extreme left-wing party, both of which support Russia in this war. And the fact that Scholz was facing electoral problems led him to make a call to Putin. Now, the Germans say that Scholz condemned Russia's attack and called on Moscow to negotiate for a fair peace, and talked about Germany's unwavering determination to support Ukraine. Nonetheless, the long-term pressures on Western countries, including, of course, in the UK, mean that we always have to be alert to countries weakening their support. And in Germany, we see that there are many streams of thought, just as there are actually in France, or indeed now in the US, where there is always a risk that some of these countries may weaken their support for Ukraine. So we need to be steadfast in supporting Kiev.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As, and live stream.
All right, so I saw there's this breaking news from CNN. Ukraine claims that Russia launched ICBM at eastern city of Dnipro. All right, so before I do that, I'm very upset with the censorship with YouTube right now. I'm so pissed off at the moment. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. It's the-studio-reykjavik.com. Help support my work. All right, I'm censored. I'm censored regularly every time I try to inform you about what's going on with the next wave that's going to most likely happen in December or January. But please, help support my work, all right? Ask your social media to follow me. Because, oh, by the way, on the big channel, I get bled. YouTube bleeds my subscribers. They unsubscribe them. And that's been happening for 5 years, slowly. So please help support my work. Go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the great supplements that I offer, like olive leaf extract. This lowers inflammation, and it also helps to improve your lipid profile. So this is a dual purpose product. It lowers inflammation and improves the immune system. And by lowering inflammation at the cardiovascular level, you're reducing the chances of further plaque formation. In addition, by lowering LDL levels and increasing your HDL levels, you're improving your total cholesterol. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the olive leaf extract. This is a great product to start on your journey for proper health. And lignans, really important to boost up your immune system. This is a powder. You mix it with food or with filtered water. Take it every day. It's really easy to use, and it's a great supplement to boost up your immune system. It's an antioxidant, and it brings down inflammation. These are synergistic. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, get the lignans and get the olive leaf extract. It's the-studio-reykjavik.com. All right, let's see what happens with
In a kitchen, everything should work around you. Reflect your taste in every sense. The new Miele kitchen appliances are more intuitive than ever before. That's quality ahead of its time.
Massive payload of explosive, much shorter delivery times, and hit targets across Ukraine in a matter of minutes. That's why I think there's heightened anxiety here in Kiev. We saw ourselves in the recent trip to a bomb shelter. The US Embassy, maybe they knew something about this when they closed yesterday. We simply don't know. Other NATO members joined them in their snap closure. They're open again today, but I think we wake this morning to Ukraine very nervous about what else may be in Russia's arsenal, and a fast-paced series of events here. Not only have we seen the European power, Germany, ring the Kremlin head, Vladimir Putin, to talk diplomacy last week. We've had this Biden development with the attackers, and just now the British Ministry of Defence suggesting they had not seen the front lines as unstable since the first days of the war. A very rare, stark assessment from a Western ally of how badly, frankly, Ukraine's doing on the front. Back to you.
It is terrifying, those pictures of those missiles coming down so fast and so many. The fury that we're seeing there and the fear growing by the hour. Thank you so much, Nick Payton-Walsh, for being there. Please make sure you and your crew are as safe as possible. Kate.
Thank you. Joining us right now is CNN anchor and chief national security analyst, Jim Sciutto. Jim, let's talk first about everything that NPW was just talking about. I mean, what if this was an ICBM, and regardless of it, just the direction this is all headed? I mean, what do you think of this? What could be a new move by Russia in the first?
I mean,
you gotta
pay attention to what's going on here. It's not just the escalation with the ICBMs and the ATACMS and the Storm Shadows and this escalation of potential tactical nukes, but there's things happening in the world, in the Congo, things that are starting to emerge in the United States that could erode your civil liberties and affect your health. And I've been trying to warn people for the last 5 years on this. Now, I have to be a little coy as I'm talking right now because of the strikes that I keep on getting on YouTube. Please help support my work. All right? This is not, it's, some sort of, joke or anything. This is very serious, what's starting to emerge here. And if we, the public, don't stop this, we are going to have problems in the future. So please help support my work. And pay attention to what I'm saying, because I have a certain ability that most people don't have.
Well, first on what it is, if Western officials are saying it was not an ICBM, and the U.S. has capability to identify any rocket or missile launch around the globe the moment it happens. We have satellites at geostationary orbit, many thousands of miles up, that are America's nuclear early warning system, and they're designed to do this so that they can spot them. They know what their trajectory is, their speed, size, payload, etc. So if the U.S. is not seeing this as an ICBM, I think we should believe that. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not a significant attack, and Russia has repeatedly done this, right? Introduced new weapons, hypersonics, etc., glide bombs, drones, etc., to scare the heck out of Ukraine. The other piece I would add is, if it is a longer range missile, what's significant about that beyond Ukraine, right, is that a Russian ICBM launch, given its range and size, would threaten not just Ukraine, it would potentially threaten Europe or the US, right, depending on where it's going. In other words, US alarm bells would be going off to say, we got to watch this one and make sure it's not coming towards us. So it's significant on a number of fronts.
Also happening, and you've been doing some new reporting on this, is why I want to get to it, is kind of a debate over, was it an accident or was it sabotage? And this has to do with 2 undersea internet cables in the Baltic Sea. They were cut Sunday. 1 cable between Lithuania and Sweden, 1 cable between Finland and Germany. Germany's defense minister said that his quote was, "Nobody believes that these cables were accidentally severed." But you have been reporting on this as well, and there seems to be still an open question: accident versus sabotage.
So let's go back. What's up?
Hi, Jared. We brought you here today to let you know that we made the business decision to.
So let's go back a little bit. A couple months ago, I had a story out about how closely the U.S. was watching Russia for exactly this threat. Russia has a highly secretive military unit designed expressly to monitor, map, survey underwater cables, and possibly attack them. They have surface ships, they have submarines, they have naval drones. And in September, I had a story that the U.S. believed Russia's calculus on ordering such an attack on undersea cables had changed. Changed meaning they were more likely to order such an attack. And the U.S. had noticed increased activity by this highly secretive unit in this space, right? Watching these cables and hovering above them. So that's the threat environment. So then this happens. So I go to my sources and I say, what did you see there? And what they say at this point, the U.S. intelligence assessment is that these particular, I don't want to call them strikes, right, but you know, cable cutting was the result. What was the result of an anchor dragging an anchor, a ship dragging its anchor unintentionally over those cables and causing that damage. Now, intelligence is it's not an exact art, that this is the assessment today. And my understanding is that the U.S. has not established a connection between that ship and entities or nations that would order such an attack. Doesn't mean that they won't at some point establish a connection, but at this point, they don't have the goods to establish that connection. And that's why they're saying, and you know, I spoke to multiple officials that the U.S. assessment at this point was that it's not intentional. Listen, clearly there's a disagreement because some European officials who are closer to this issue, frankly, right, it took place in Europe, are not convinced that's the case, and the U.S. assessment could change. But at least at this point, they haven't made that hard tie yet. They haven't made that hard connection yet.
I find this like what they're calling it part of hybrid warfare, but just kind of this space fascinating and terrifying, and kind of how quickly and dangerous this game, if you want to call it that, can become, especially with your great reporting that there's an entire unit in the Russian military focused on this. I mean, it's something that we definitely have not heard the last of yet. Jim, it's great to see. Oh, go ahead.
To that point, Kate, it's not just Russia that's active in this space. China is very active in this space. They have done similar kind of surveys around Taiwan, for instance, with the possibility, the threat of cutting cables to disable Taiwan. Notably, this ship involved in this anchor drag was a Chinese ship.
Beginning of, you know, quite a story. It's the beginning of. Let's see where this heads next.
I'll be interested to see if we get any clearer idea today as to whether the Russians told America they were going to do this in advance.
Yeah, I think so.
Because
I think
it
that's
seems
a good
to be
point.
that
I think they told because it's an ICBM, I think they said, this is what's going to happen. So, you know, don't launch a nuclear strike on us. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get this C60. This is a very potent antioxidant. They'll soak up free radicals. I have it in different versions. I have it in an extra virgin olive oil. I have it in an MCT coconut oil and an avocado oil. C60 is a carbon molecule that will soak up free radicals. It's a molecule that has 60 carbons, and because of that configuration, it can soak up those free radicals much more than vitamin C. All right. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the 2 ounce, the 4 ounce, or the 8 ounce configuration. Take a teaspoon of it a day, and what it will do will soak up those free radicals, improve the mitochondrial health, and your ATP will go up. It's a great way to get those free radicals soaked up. And by having those free radicals soaked up in your cells, then what's going to happen is you're going to have better health of those cells will perform better, the tissues will perform better, even your neurons will perform better. Why? Because your neurons need a lot of mitochondria, healthy mitochondria, to be able to make neurotransmitters. And in addition, your immune system needs a lot of ATP too. So please boost up that ATP, soak up those free radicals. Go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the C60. This is a very potent antioxidant. Get it in avocado oil, extra virgin olive oil, or the MCT coconut oil. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. As you can see, I am a bit perturbed with the strike that I received on YouTube. So it's very important for you to support my work. Please go to my store. Please help by donating, and make sure you subscribe to all of my channels so you can continue to get information from me, because you're going to need it. Trust me.
Messaging we had from the US Embassy in Kyiv yesterday, essentially saying they were expecting a heavy air attack, might be connected with some advance notification that they were going to use this missile.
Let's move now to Mark Urban, defence and diplomacy expert, columnist now for the Sunday Times. Mark, welcome back. We're getting these reports this morning saying that Russia has fired an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, for the first time since Moscow's full-scale invasion in 2022. Indeed, it will be the first time an ICBM has ever been deployed against a city or against an enemy. What else do we know? How serious do we take this to be?
Well, I think it is serious in the sense that it is a kind of demonstration of capability, intent, and signalling. It may amuse you to learn there's been a bit of a debate going on among the spotters, the missile spotters this morning, about whether it is in fact an...
Yeah, I saw that. We're not sure, are we?
Well, the range, I mean, the range it's supposed to have flown last night, which is 800 or 900 kilometers, is obviously very much below what we would call an ICBM type of range, although apparently this weapon can be used at up to 5,000 kilometers. I think it's kind of analogous to those missiles that were fired by Iran at Israel last month, at the beginning of October. So in that sense, it's not an unprecedented. I mean, we saw those extraordinary images of multiple warheads coming down from this, I beg your pardon, single warheads coming down on Israel, apparently multiple warheads coming down on Ukraine during the night. So fairly remarkable images. Clearly, this type of system is not particularly accurate. It's designed to deliver nuclear warheads, and they were clearly not nuclear warheads. Another debate has gone on this morning about whether they were just inert or dummy warheads, or whether they were conventional explosive. Either way, I think what we're looking at is a significant sending of a message by Russia after the US gave the green light to Ukraine to use ATACMS ground-launched and Storm Shadow air-launched missiles. I mean, I'll be interested to see if we get any clearer idea today as to whether the Russians told America they were going to do this in advance, because it seems to me that the messaging we had from the US Embassy in Kyiv yesterday, essentially saying they were expecting a heavy air attack, might be connected with some advance notification that they were going to use this missile.
I think that's the case.
Indeed. Let's stand back a little bit. We may or may not have the deployment of an ICBM into the war. You rightly say we're not exactly sure. We do know that Storm Shadow and the American equivalent is now being used by Ukraine to hit military targets on Russian soil. Where would you say the conflict is now? Give us an overview of where this conflict is now as we approach Christmas.
Well, look, I think I've been expecting for some time us to go into an end game. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about the fact that neither side seems able to decide the issue on the battlefield, that both sides have got quite severe problems sustaining the conflict from the point of view of the number of troops being killed, but also in some other respects, financially, and in some other respects, weapons in the case of Ukraine.
I know everyone tells you to time block to be more productive, but it doesn't really work. Let me explain why. Time blocking is when you plan all your tasks in your calendar to make sure you wait.
In the case of Ukraine. So I think both sides will be looking to a way out of this. And of course, they expect a new impetus from Donald Trump. I mean, that was part of his campaign pitch, that he would end this war. So I think a lot of what we're seeing at the moment is around the different players or protagonists trying to shape this end game or this entry into negotiation. Now, could there be in a Gulf state somewhere diplomats already indulging in these scoping talks for such negotiation? We don't know that that is the case. It's possible. I mean, we did find out a couple of months ago that there had been scoping talks in Qatar about possibly the two sides stopping their long-range strikes against one another's energy infrastructure. Now, this was something which Russia very clearly did not stick to last weekend when they
because they did it at the weekend.
Yeah, emphatically showed us that no such deal is in place. But I mean, I think what was interesting about that and why I sat up and paid attention, was because it indicated the general presumption is that Ukraine is in a much worse position than Russia, and that Vladimir Putin wants to keep going because he senses he has the advantage. Well, broadly, I would say that's true, but those talks of a couple of months ago seem to indicate that Russia also was feeling the pain in some of the strikes that Ukraine was making on its infrastructure. So we know other things too, of course, to do with manpower shortages, that kind of thing, shortages of troops, particularly trained troops on the Russian side, are severe just as they are on the Ukrainian side. So I don't think it's beyond the bounds of possibility that Vladimir Putin will enter into this, but he'll drive as hard a bargain as he can. And clearly, Donald Trump goes into this having said he wants to stop it, but equally he won't want to look like a complete pushover for Vladimir Putin.
This is heavy. It's warm. Loads of pockets. I'm impressed with it. This is the best skin
package for Vladimir Putin, because after all, you know, every party in this has agency. Volodymyr Zelensky could also say, well, I'm sorry, but America is trying to strong-arm me into what is in effect a capitulation. I'm not going to do it. Now, how able he would be to carry on the war with, you know, the support of the likes of Poland, the Baltic states, we don't know. But we're in this stage, I think, at the moment where all of these protagonists are trying to shape this conversation going into what we assume could be an American brokered process to stop the war.
Okay, Mark, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining us this morning and bringing us up to speed.
Russia has launched an intercontinental ballistic missile at Ukraine for the first time, according to the government in Kyiv. The Ukrainian Air Force said that the missile was being used as part of an attack.
Before we continue on the ICBM by Russia, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the great structural nano silver soaps that I have. I have 4 different varieties. I have lemongrass. I have the peppermint version. I also have charcoal tea tree and oatmeal spice. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get a couple bars for your household. These are very high quality structural nano silver soaps. Way better than stuff that you're getting at your store or your grocery store or whatever. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the soaps from my store, use them, you'll be happy. They're very high quality. Please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. The link is in the description of this video.
Infrastructure in Dnipro, a city in central Ukraine. Tensions between Moscow and the West were already high after Ukraine fired British Storm Shadow missiles into Russian territory. The Defence Secretary John Healey has been speaking with the Defence Select Committee this morning.
This is a serious moment that I come before the committee. Defence intelligence will reveal today that the front line is now less stable
than at any time since the early days of the full-scale Russian invasion in February 22. And we've seen in recent weeks a very clear escalation from Putin and his forces.
Well, he told the committee that there should be no doubt that the UK is stepping up its support of Ukraine. Jamie Shea was Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges at NATO, and he joins me now. Hello, Jamie.
Good afternoon to you.
Thanks very much for being with us. How serious is this, the firing of an intercontinental ballistic missile? What's the significance of this kind of missile?
Well, in operational terms, I don't think it represents a massive step change because Russia has used this missile to do what it's been doing with all of its other missiles over the last 2 years, which is to strike Ukrainian cities, civilian targets, Ukrainian infrastructure. And what it's done with this intercontinental ballistic RS-26 missile is exactly the same as what it could do with its much shorter range missiles, which it's been using, of course, in great abundance. So in terms of the hit, it doesn't represent a step change, but politically and strategically, it certainly does. We're in a now different world altogether because this is the first time that Russia has used these intercontinental ballistic missiles. It's sending, I think, to the West a powerful signal of Putin's willingness to escalate and be reckless in the face, of course, of what he's seen in recent days with the US and the UK giving authority to Ukraine to use their missiles to strike Russian targets. And it's also something which is very worrying, Hugo, because the United States does not know in advance whether one of these Russian intercontinental missiles is a nuclear missile or a conventional missile. And it doesn't know when the missile is fired if it's heading towards a NATO country or towards Ukraine. So it vastly increases the chance for very dangerous miscalculation because of that. And it's a very
This is the reason why I think that there was probably some communication between Russia and the United States about what Russia was going to do. And there is a window where the United States can wait to make sure that Russia is being truthful with their conversation. Assume that's what happened. I think that's what happened. But this is what I stated early on in this broadcast. We're moving towards higher probability of a miscalculation in the use of tactical nukes. Big problem. And if that happens, then you'll have the national security state in the United States trying to get more power. It will be a 9/11 kind of an event where they're going to go to Congress and ask for more power. And we're going to have more civil liberties taken away. If you don't believe me, I think it's Anne Leibovitz. Was it Leibovitz or Anne? She's the one that just wrote these books about nuclear war. And I forgot her name. I'll look it up. But she talked to generals and she talked to people that were in war planning for nuclear protocols and stuff. And she said, what's going to happen is that the Constitution is going to be gone. You're not, when a war happens, when a nuclear war happens, she takes it to the extreme where it's complete destruction. When that does happen, you're not going to have, the government isn't going to care. You're going to be totally by yourself. There won't be FEMA to help you. And not only that, there's going to be continuity of government to protect those people, and they're not going to care about the rest of the population. So it's going to be everyone for themselves in a complete global exchange of nuclear weapons. Now, in tactical nuke issue, which is lower in terms of intensity, what's going to happen is that the national security state is going to leverage politicians to give them more power, to give the national security state more power, just like what happened during 9/11. They're going to say, oh, Russia used a tactical nuke. We need to, be able to surveil the citizens. We need to surveil the world and track movement to make sure that we don't have a rogue actor that could, launch something or bomb something. And so the NSA, the FBI, and the CIA are going to get more control. They're going to get more power, just like what happened in 9/11. This is the reason why a tactical nuke can't go off in Europe. Because if it does, you, as a citizen of the United States, you're going to lose constitutional rights. And if you don't believe me, sit down and really think about it.
It's a step forward by Putin.
We're all obviously extremely worried about escalation in over Ukraine between the West and Russia at the moment. Jamie, is Russia more worried than we are?
Well, the Russians, of course, have always been the ones to escalate first, invading Ukraine, of course, in the first place, and then, of course, stepping up the nature of their offensive to hit Ukrainian cities, civilian targets, and the like. Obviously, we're not interested in a negotiated peace, but on the drive to win the war. And what the West has done, of course, incrementally, is try to block that strategy by giving Ukraine access to higher quality weapons, from tanks, of course, first supplied by the UK, then to more sophisticated air defence, to F-16s, and now, of course, to the use of these ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles. But, of course, Russia likes to control the narrative, and vis-a-vis his domestic population, and also vis-a-vis public opinion in the West, the notion that Russia tries to put out that we're responsible somehow, that it's NATO that's really attacking Russia behind Ukraine, and Russia is therefore the victim, and we're doing the escalation. It doesn't, of course, tally with the facts, but it's something where the Russian propaganda machine is well versed and believes that this works. So brandishing the nuclear option, which it did this week when the Kremlin approved a new nuclear strategy, plays into that game of trying to frighten us and trying to intimidate us. But you've got to remember, Hugo, that Russia sort of promised big countermeasures against the West back in February 2022, when it first invaded Ukraine, saying to us, keep out. We didn't keep out. We've been helping Ukraine to resist, and so far those so-called Russian red lines have not proved true in practice. But of course, going forward, always difficult to know exactly what Putin has in mind.
Finally, Jamie, there's a piece in the Times today about Russia's hybrid warfare tactics, such as sabotage, cyber attacks and assassinations, and so on. How widespread do we think that kind of activity is already, and do we think it could dramatically increase?
It's been widespread for years, Hugo, well before we had this major crisis with Russia after its invasion of Ukraine. We've had a whole series of sort of Russian disruption operations against targets both in North America as well as in Europe. Any 1 week you will see, for example, Russia jamming GPS navigation signals in the Baltic area, which have led to cancellation of civilian flights from Finland and Sweden into the rest of Europe. You've seen the interference with these underwater cables. We've had 2 big incidents this week in the Baltic where 2 major telecommunications cables have been cut, although not clear yet if that was done by Russia. The whole point, Hugo, about these so-called hybrid warfare tactics is you cover your tracks. We've seen disruption of energy infrastructure. We've seen sabotage operations, forest fires, the attempt to contaminate the water at a NATO base in Germany this past summer, assassinations, although, as we saw in the UK with the Litvinenko incident and, of course, the attack in Salisbury, those assassinations are often against Russian opposition members rather than against the Westerners. Then there's cyber disinformation. There's a whole panoply on which Russia can play, always denying that it's behind them, but to try to polarize the West and to sow discord, and of course to try to interfere with the functionality of our system, which could then, final word, undermine our ability to defend ourselves.
Jamie Shea, thank you very much.
That was
indeed,
Times
Jamie.
Radio. I want to get the BBC perspective on the same issue here.
Mikey's here. Mikey Kay, former senior British officer who for 20 years flew assault helicopters for the RAF. He's a former strategic military planner, and whenever we do this segment, he leads it, as he would were he still in the military. Does feel like a fast escalating situation. We've had the first use of the ATACMS, the first use of the Storm Shadows, the announcement on the landmines today. What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's been a rapid 3 days or last 72 hours in terms of policy making decisions. Let's look what that means on a map. Go slide, please. What we can see here is we've now got effectively a layered defense system where Zelensky can long-range deep strike using HIMARS, not necessarily deep, that's 50 miles. You can go to Storm Shadow, which goes out at 150 miles, and then ATACMS, which goes out to 190. And what we can see on the map here is we've got an area called Kursk, which comes well within the range of both Storm Shadow and ATACMS. ATACMS was used on Monday against Bryansk, which is to the northwest of Kursk. So what we're seeing here now, Christian, is effectively a picnic basket full of defense weapons and deep strike weapons that Zelensky now has.
Remind us about the Storm Shadow, what it is, and how is it being delivered?
Yeah, the delivery point is really important. We'll come on to that in a second. But if we go to slide, please. That's the Su Sukhoi 24. The Storm Shadow and the Scalp, which is the French version, which is exactly the same, but just called a different name. The Su-24 has been modified. The Storm Shadow has been modified to be able to drop 2 of those. Now, I think what's in months? Say again?
In months?
Well, I mean, the procurement process of the Storm Shadow was a long time. We're probably talking out of a decade. The procurement process to modify the Storm Shadow and the Scalp onto an aircraft such as the Su-24, I think surprised a lot of people in terms of how quickly it could be done. Months, if not within a year.
I know you've taken an issue because a lot of our library footage today is showing tornadoes going out with the Storm Shadow on it.
Yeah, typhoons.
Typhoons, sorry. And quite obviously, the typhoons haven't delivered it.
No, the library footage that we've seen today, and it's a really important point you raise, is library footage of what the Storm Shadow was originally made for. That was originally made for the GR4 Tornado. That's a British jet. That's now at the surface, and then the Storm Shadow was modified for the Typhoon. And they're the pictures that you've been seeing today that have been uploaded onto the Typhoon taxiing down the runway. But it's absolutely imperative to understand that that is not the delivery system. The delivery system is the Su-24. Can you go to slide, please? This is a video from the Ukrainian Air Force of an Su-24. It's a long-range strike fighter bomber. It can travel up to speeds of Mach 2. And what you're seeing there is 2 Storm Shadows or Scalps, we don't actually know, being dropped from it. That is what is being used today. And I think at this point, what is it being used on? If we go back to the slide of the ranges, I think what's important at the moment is that Biden originally approved ATACMS for the Kursk region, the Bryansk region. That's where the main effort's going at the moment. We spoke on the security brief a week ago, 2 weeks ago, about how there was a buildup of North Korean troops. Some numbers were saying up to 50,000 combined Russian DPRK troops in the Kursk region. This is what the Storm Shadow will be going after. Zelensky will be going after high-value strategic assets such as command and control systems. These will be in bunkers, and the Storm Shadow and the Scalp is a bunker buster.
Well, I was going to say, why is it specifically good at that?
It's just been designed for that. It can travel, it's transonic, so the Storm Shadow can travel up to 600 miles an hour. When it gets released off the jet, as we saw in the footage there, it will descend down to 150 feet. It'll pop up using GPS coordinates, and then it'll
So they would stand off. They would probably be on the Ukrainian side of the border, would they, where they release this?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's for air defense reasons. You know, the Ukrainians have to be really careful about the amount of air assets that they're losing. They've not just got the Su-24, they've got the MiG-29, they've got the Su-27, but effectively the Su-24 is the only one that can carry this capability, Storm Shadow or Scalp. So that's now become a prized asset. That's almost become a strategic asset. So as you rightly say, they want to be able to stand off a little bit so they're outside of Russian air defense.
We've not had confirmation that it has been used from the Ministry of Defence. We didn't have a statement from the Defence Secretary today. There's been this strategy of ambiguity, which we saw going back to the G20 with Keir Starmer over the last 2 days. And I would suppose that they will maintain that, right? And that's important when we talk about these fragments of missiles we're seeing, because as you say, it could be the Scalp.
It could be. I mean, so Keir Starmer has at the G20, he's held his cards very, very close to his chest. You know, as a military strategic planner, former planner, you don't want politicians telegraphing what your next moves are going to be. You don't want to be giving Putin the ammunition in terms of where he now has his air defense systems, his airfield, his C2 bunkers that are now in a vulnerable position. So I think what Sir Keir Starmer did was absolutely correct. But if you can go slide, please. What you'll see from this next picture is a storm shadow / scalp. The point of this, Christian, is that they look exactly the same. And so until we get absolute verified evidence of debris fragmentation, if we've got a UK government minister or a senior MOD official from the UK saying, yes, we approve storm shadow and storm shadow is used, then there's always a small sort of area of ambiguity as to whether that could be scalp. And it's important to say we've heard nothing from the French government yet as well.
They're just escalating the issue. They just keep on escalating. It's going to get worse. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the NAC. This helps to boost up your glutathione levels. This soaks up free radicals. In addition, NAC helps to detoxify your liver and your kidney, especially if you're taking acetaminophen. And NAC helps to improve anxiety. All right, so please go to my store, get the NAC. This is a great way to boost up those glutathione levels and soak up free radicals in a different pathway. With modern society, we're exposed to heavy metals, toxins, and chemicals. It's really important to detoxify your body. Go to my store and get the zeolite. This will remove heavy metals, toxins, and chemicals. How it works is that zeolite is the negatively charged molecule. It'll attach to the positively charged toxin, and it'll allow you to urinate it out in 6 to 8 hours or so. So please, it's really important. Pay attention. Detoxify your body. All right. Take my zeolite. You can take it year round. Take a couple drops underneath your tongue. Drink it with filtered water. You can do that year round. If you're going to be doing it once or twice a year, you want to do it a little bit more with the number of drops. Just put, maybe 4 or 5 little drops underneath your tongue, drink it with filtered water, and then, use up the bottle, and then do that once or twice a year. So you can take it year round, take 2 drops underneath your tongue year round as a maintenance, or if you're just detoxifying once or twice a year, take about, maybe 4 or 5 small drops underneath your tongue, and then drink it with filtered water. Use up the bottle. Boom. Do that once or twice a year. It's up to you, but you can do this year round. So please go to my store and get the zeolite. Detoxify your body. Really important, because we're exposed to many heavy metals, toxins, and chemicals in our food, in our water, and in the air that we breathe. So please go to my store and detoxify your body. All right. Let's see what Bloomberg has to say.
So we sent nearly $30 billion of exports, or 17% of all of our ag products, to them last year. So if in fact we do move forward with this 60% tariff on Chinese goods, they're going to retaliate. Soybeans and ag products are an easy target. We saw it during Trump's first term, and I see really little reason to believe that's going to be any different this time. And if you look at what happened during the last administration, we saw ag exports come down by more than 50%. Soybeans were down more than 70%. So we're talking very significant reductions from our most important customer. And people aren't going to go out and spend until there's better visibility on trade relations.
So, that is tough. When that happens, when the Chinese market gets curtailed via tariffs, what do the exporting farmers do? Are there other parts of the world that'll take our soybeans, take our corn, take our wheat?
So China has been, steadily diverting or pulling more of their imports from Brazil. So I'd expect that, we're going to continue to lose share to South American growers, particularly Brazil, Argentina, as they ramp up production. As a consequence of that, trade flows are going to have to reroute. We only have, finite amount of grains and soybeans. So there is going to have to be some movement. It's not like those exports are going to go to zero. But, I think one of the bigger concerns here that is really maybe not even fully appreciated is that, I think U.S. farmers are going to structurally lose market share to South America. And that's going to be tough to, reroute trade flows and to, regain share to the magnitude of what we had seen historically.
All right, Chris, we really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Chris Giolino, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior U.S. Machinery Analyst. Some breaking news for you concerning Volkswagen. Volkswagen labor side is warning that a strike at VW could start in December. The labor side said the next round of talks are on December 19th.
I really don't care about Volkswagen. The S&P 500 is trading at 59.27 right now, and oil is above $70 a barrel, just barely. And the Euro USD currency pair is showing 1.049. So there's a strengthening of the dollar. So we have a strengthening of the dollar. There's a little bit of an elevation in oil. There is a little bit of an elevation in VIX, but not by much. It's at about 16.99. And, you know, the equity market's bouncing up and down today.
Now, I'm in Houston for yet another challenge to a merger. This is a trial of the Federal Trade Commission versus Tempur Sealy and Mattress Firm trying to block that deal. So that trial's been going all week, and I've been attending it up until today.
Don't really care. Okay. Let's see here. I haven't seen anything on Al Jazeera lately, so what's going on in Al Jazeera? Commercial.
Today's actually a really exciting day because we got to unfold one of these units right in front of a crowd of people.
The ICC has no jurisdiction. This is something that it said back in May as well. Now, it is going to be coordinating with Israel as well as its international partners, it says, to discuss next steps. Now, having said that, one of the top Republicans in the U.S. Senate, Senator Lindsey Graham, who posted earlier that he was opposed to this decision, has since issued another post that is even stronger than the one he issued in the last couple of hours. He goes on to say to President Biden, as well as President-elect Donald Trump, as well as current members of Congress and those that are elected for the upcoming Congress that will be taking place in January, saying those that do not act forcefully against the ICC in this outrageous decision are making a huge mistake. And I fear that the United States is next. If we do not fight back, we are conceding that they have jurisdiction over the United States. He says he'll be introducing legislation that puts the court on notice if you aid and abet the ICC, or rather puts countries on notice. In other words, those that aid and abet the ICC against Israel should expect consequences from the United States. Any nation, he's saying, that joins the ICC is a partner that tramples on the rule of law. So in other words, he's saying that anyone that complies, that would in any way, if the Prime Minister Netanyahu or the defense minister were to travel to that country, if they were to arrest one of these individuals, they could expect that they would be seeking or would be receiving some sort of action by the United States. This is a strongly worded threat by the very senior Senator Lindsey Graham that was posted on the social media platform X in just the last hour or so.
Kimberly, I want to point out something that's actually 2 days old, but becomes even more relevant at the moment, from another U.S. Senator, Senator John Thune from South Dakota, who, as you know, will be the next Senate Majority Leader, right? The incoming one. He tweeted just 2 days ago that if the ICC and its prosecutor do not reverse their, this is a direct quote, reading his tweet, do not reverse their outrageous and unlawful actions to pursue arrest warrants against Israeli officials, then the Senate should immediately pass sanctions legislation. All right. Arrest warrants means the U.S. should sanction the ICC and the prosecutor. How serious is the U.S. threat of sanctions against an international court of law?
Now, you got to remember what was going on with South Africa. Now, South Africa has big deficit issues. Iran and China are funding South Africa. South Africa was the nation that set in motion this legal lawsuit against Israel. All right. So you need to follow the money. the money is coming from Iran. But what's even weirder is that because of the Biden administration, given, rolling back some of the policies that Trump had with Iran, set in motion for Iran to have more cash flow. So it's some of that cash flow funnels into South Africa. All right. So there's even a bigger issue here. Not where just the money is flowing to the ICC, but should an international court have authority over a sovereign nation? Now, the way our Constitution is that's a no. That's a big no. So everyone is talking about ICC stuff. Do you really want an international court? Do you really want to have a uber government over your sovereign nation? I don't think so.
It's extremely serious. I mean, first of all, it's saying that it, number one, doesn't recognize the jurisdiction of the court, which we know, but that in and of itself is hypocritical because it does recognize the jurisdiction when it comes to Vladimir Putin, which this administration has called a war criminal, and does recognize its jurisdiction when it comes to prosecuting Vladimir Putin for what it says are alleged war crimes when it comes to his invasion of Ukraine. Now, the other reason this is serious is because any sort of U.S. sanctions against the ICC prosecutor would mean that their property could be revoked. If they have property here in the United States, they could be prevented from conducting any sort of transactions with regard to their property. This could be hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars. They could have their visas revoked, and they can also be prevented from traveling to the United States. So the implications for not only themselves, but also their family members as well. Perhaps they have family members studying in the United States, living in the United States.
The problem with the ICC is it's too easier to hijack it by a nation. We should not have an uber government, period.
Implications could have a ripple effect, and so it is extremely serious.
Kimberly Halkett, great to talk to you. Thank you very much for your reporting there from the White House. Meanwhile, Israel's forces continue to pound northern Gaza with no sign of letting up. An overnight attack on the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood in Gaza City killed at least 22 people. 10 of them were children. Entire residential buildings were flattened and reduced to rubble. Ibrahim Al-Khalili has the latest from the site of that attack in Gaza City.
I am right now standing above the rubble of one of the houses that has been targeted in an overnight attack by the Israeli fighter jets in Abu Skandar area in Sheikh Radwan, northern Gaza City. As you can see, the scale of the destruction inflicted on this 6-story building. As you can see, mass destruction, mass devastation. The attack resulted in killing Palestinians and dozens were injured. As we have spoken to civilians here, the restoring process is continuing. Civilians are trying to help getting the trapped civilians from under the rubble. And as you can see, this house, which was once sheltering civilians who took refuge in this home and displaced to this home from the areas of the Valley Refugee Camp, Bethlehem, Beit Hanun. They ended up being targeted and brutally killed in an overnight attack while they were sleeping. At least 11 apartments have been flattened down to the ground with the continuation of the Israeli bombardment targeting several areas in northern Gaza City. The suffering of civilians exacerbating as time goes by. Ibrahim Khalili, Al Jazeera, Northern Gaza, Palestine.
Hani Mahmoud is in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. So Hani, we just had the reporting about that attack in Gaza City. I want to ask you for this hour, what the reaction is from Palestinians you've been talking to the ICC's arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant.
We're gonna go to a show that Al Jazeera did about the dollar. All right, let's see here.
Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan, and this is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, the US dollar has been on a roll, but for how much longer? We look at why the greenback has strengthened, and if that could spell trouble for the rest of the world. Donald Trump's tariff threats could help decide Britain's trade future, so should the UK pick sides between the US and Europe? Or can it strike deals with both allies? And Indonesia wants to become a high-income nation by 2045, but its middle class is shrinking. So what can help shore up the incomes of millions of Indonesian people? Donald Trump will soon be back in the top job, and the US dollar has risen on the back of his presidential election victory. It got a lot stronger, the strongest in a year, days after Trump was elected. The rally last week underscored the strength of the American economy in comparison to its world peers, known as American economic exceptionalism. And it makes it cheaper for many American shoppers to buy foreign goods and to travel abroad. But a strong dollar doesn't lift all boats. Companies that export products may become less competitive, and the US deficit may widen. That's a problem for Trump, who's often said that he prefers a weaker dollar. The greenback's rise could also create a lot of pain for the rest of the world, as Veronica Pedrosa reports.
Donald Trump prefers a weaker exchange rate to support the growth of US exports and help reduce the country's trade deficit. But since winning the US presidential election, the dollar has skyrocketed, mostly in anticipation of his policies to impose tariffs on imports and cut taxes.
Trump is known for growth policy, so I think that's why the market has been reacting positively because the he's pro-growth, so it will stimulate economic growth. However, having said that, pro-growth policy will also bring inflationary expectation to it because you are stimulating the economy.
A strong dollar makes it cheaper for American consumers to buy foreign goods and to travel abroad. But for US companies, it means their exports become more expensive and less competitive in the global market. And for other countries dependent on trade with the US, they are bracing themselves for the effects of higher costs and a potential economic slowdown.
업계와도 긴밀하게 소통하면서
Given that we now have an anticipated policy direction, even before the Trump administration has fully launched, the international markets have already begun responding. So please monitor the markets carefully and prepare comprehensively.
Trump wants a weak dollar, but his policies might have the opposite effect, which would not only impact the US, but the entire global economy. Veronica Pedrosa, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
The continent expected to be hit hardest by the effects of a stronger dollar is Africa, where 9 countries are in debt distress, meaning that they can't repay their loans. Many of these loans must be paid in dollars, and a stronger dollar makes them more expensive. This forces countries to spend less on things like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. The rising dollar also increases the cost of imports. This can cause inflation to rise in countries already struggling. For example, South Sudan's inflation rate is 107%. Zimbabwe's is over 50% annually. Many African economies depend on exporting commodities like oil, gold, and copper. These are all priced in dollars, and a stronger dollar makes these goods more expensive for consumers globally, eventually reducing their demand and ultimately shrinking export revenues. This could be a major issue for countries like Nigeria, South Africa, and Zambia. Well, joining us now from London is Naeem Aslam, CIO of Zay Capital Markets. Really good to have you with us. Why would a Donald Trump presidential victory have strengthened the dollar so significantly?
Thanks for having me. I think it was very much given that when Donald Trump, the president-elect, will take the office, dollar is going to become more stronger because he is very much pro dollar, and then he's going to make sure that dollar is going to remain the dominant currency. Now, as you've mentioned earlier, obviously stronger dollar is a major headwind for a number of emerging countries, the one that you've mentioned. However, there is a bit of a caveat to that, and that is, but if you are looking at oil prices, yes, dollar will become stronger, but then of course there are chances where we could look at dollar becoming a bit more weaker as well, which I will discuss in the later part. But first, let's look at from the commodity perspective, and then especially from an oil perspective. When the president-elect will take the office, what we are anticipating,
They did this recording 1 hour ago. All right. Now, if you look at, or at least posted it, let me just put it that way. If you look at the dashboard right now, the dollar is strengthening, and it's now trading at 1.047.
For oil prices, we are anticipating oil prices to go down to $40 or perhaps below $40. Why? Because his policy is going to be very simple: drill, baby, drill. And that is what American oil companies are going to do. So that means we're going to have an abundant supply on the market. Now let's go shift back to your conversation about stronger dollar. Will we see a more stronger dollar, or why the stronger dollar has happened? The reason is, of course, what the Federal Reserve is, how the Federal Reserve is handling its monetary policy in relation to economic data. Now, yes, of course, Trump, on one hand, he is very much pro-dollar. He wants the dollar to remain strong. But at the same time, he is also an individual, or shall we say, an elected president who doesn't like interest rates to remain strong for a longer period of time. So there is this element, there is this concern among the investors and traders that when president-elect will take the office, he will exert more pressure on the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates more rapidly. So what does that entail? That entails that the current strength, which everyone is worried about in the emerging market, may no longer be that much of a significant threat for them. In fact, we could be looking at a situation where we have a weaker dollar and also lower commodity prices.
So I just want to pick you up on something you said there. You said that Trump is in favor of a stronger dollar. He's made it clear in the past that he would prefer the dollar to be weaker. Are there lessons for the incoming Trump administration from his first term? All right, the dollar strengthened when he was first elected in 2016. A year later, it was something like 10% lower. He's inheriting a very different economy this time round, isn't he?
I think Trump is very lucky in terms of inheriting the economy, because when in his episode number 1, he came from Obama administration, right? So he inherited an economy which was coming from an Obama administration. Economy was on a very strong footing. So Trump had that plenty of tailwind in terms of if his policies and the economy performed really well. Now, in the season 2, shall we say, of Trump administration, again, he's incredibly lucky from that particular perspective. Why? Because we are looking at a situation from a monetary policy standpoint, from the Federal Reserve standpoint, where the Federal Reserve is cutting the interest rate. And we all know one thing for sure, and the history tells us over and over and over again, the market loves dovish Fed, meaning when interest rates are cutting, when monetary policy is actually more on the dovish side. So I think that is what we are going to see in the season 2 of Trump administration as well. So this administration is going to have a lot more experience of what they did in the season 1, i.e. when Trump was back in the office, and use that experience as a leverage to perform and do better stuff. At least that is what is anticipated among the investment community.
Could you foresee a situation where the dollar weakens against the euro, the pound, the yen, significantly below parity, perhaps?
Not below parity. That's not our base case scenario, or among the major banks that on Wall Street that we can see below parity. Below parity, all the threats of that happened during Bush administration when we were seeing financial crisis, significant dovish monetary policy, significant interest rate cuts. Now, even though we are anticipating a dovish monetary policy, meaning a number of interest rate cuts going into the next couple of years, but no one is going to expect for that number or the parity to take place. There is a possibility that we could perhaps see in terms of the euro, but in terms of sterling or other major G10 currencies, I think, especially in terms of sterling, I don't think we're going to get there until and unless, of course, the UK decides to have a more self-inflicted injuries like the one they had before, i.e. Brexit.
You couldn't foresee a situation then where Trump, troubled by a dollar that's simply too strong for his liking, introduces something like the Plaza Accord we saw in the Reagan administration, where the dollar was effectively devalued in coordination with allies.
Well, look, I am. Well, look, I'm glad that you brought those particular points, and they're very interesting points. But again, the base case scenario is going to be what the Federal Reserve or the monetary policy is really going to be doing, how much pressure is going to exert on the Federal Reserve Chairman, and if the Federal Reserve is going to have its own choice of making the interest rate. So free flow, absolutely not the best case scenario among many investors or even in the options market.
Naeem, really good to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Pleasure, Brian.
My take on this,
must choose between
my take on it is that the dollar is going to strengthen, and then the Federal Reserve is going to start to lower rates and over time, and it's going to weaken, and it's going to be basically an offset. It's the best of both worlds. So don't worry about it. Plus, your energy prices are going to go down because of drill, baby, drill. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the NAD+. NAD+ helps to boost up your energy levels. It also helps to improve the repair mechanism for your DNA damage. People that get older, they have more DNA damage, and your body needs a little bit of help to repair that. NAD+ helps with that repair. So get NAD+ to help to repair your DNA, boost up your energy levels, and to help to protect your neurons. This is a supplement that will help to improve the neural health of your neurons. So for your central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. Also get the digestive enzyme complex. This is great to reduce the stress on your pancreas. This will help to break up carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids so you can absorb them. This is a great supplement to take if you work out, also because for recovery, you need to refuel your body. This will help to break up the your food and your powder drinks and stuff, so you can refuel and recover from your workout. But if you're older, you're going to need some help with your pancreas, and this helps with that. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the digestive enzyme complex.
In Union's socialist model and the American free market. That's the demand of a top economic advisor to President-elect Donald Trump. The ultimatum made in media interviews comes with an incentive. Stephen Moore said that if the UK sides with his nation, there'd be more willingness in the Trump administration to sign a trade deal between the two allies. Critics, though, say that Moore's comment is a statement of ideology and interferes in Britain's political affairs. The governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, has warned the UK government against picking sides. But is the UK really caught between two economic models, or does it have other choices? Well, that potentially depends on what's at stake. The UK might face higher tariffs on exports to the US if it chooses to stay closer to Europe. On the campaign trail, Donald Trump has threatened levies of up to 20% on all American imports, with additional tariffs of 60% to 100% on goods bought From China, trade talks between the UK and the US also hang in balance. They've long stalled because of disagreements over agricultural standards, including concerns over the import of chlorinated chicken and hormone-treated beef into Britain. But the Bank of England has urged Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer to step up ties with the EU, saying that the UK's exit from the bloc has weighed on the nation's economy. Now, in trade, it's numbers that matter. Commerce between the UK and Europe is 3 times larger than between the UK and the US. Taken as a bloc, the EU is the UK's largest overall trade partner, accounting for 43% of trade, while the US is Britain's single largest trade partner with more than $388 billion worth of goods and services this year. The UK could face an almost $28 billion hit to its exports if Trump imposes a blanket 20% tariff on all imports, according to new analysis by the University of Sussex's Centre for Inclusive Trade Policy. While researchers at Aston University in England estimated that between 2021 and 2023, annual UK exports of goods to the EU were 17% lower than they would have been had Brexit never happened. Joining us from Colchester in the UK is Howard Reid. He's the Director of Landman Economics and the former Chief Economist at the Institute for Public Policy Research. Good to have you with us, Howard. Does the UK really have to make this choice between the US or the EU, or is the Governor of the Bank of England right when he said the UK should just continue trading with everyone as it's always done?
Well, I think the UK will continue to trade with both blocs, the US and the EU. I think what may happen is that, as you said, the Trump administration may try to pick the UK off, as it were, by offering a preferential deal. I think it would be dangerous to sign up for that because I think it might affect the UK relationship with the EU, which is our current biggest trading bloc and likely to remain so. So I think it would be dangerous to kind of take that bait, or for the UK to take that bait from the US, particularly as they're likely to insist on opening up certain markets such as chlorinated chicken, hormone-fed beef in the agricultural sector, which most UK consumers just don't want to see that happen. And so the UK government would find itself very unpopular at home were it to proceed down that road.
Okay, as you say, Britain would always be the junior partner, given the size of the US economy, in any trade deal. Is it really worth Britain's while? And you mentioned the issue of hormone-treated beef and chlorinated chicken. Would the British public stand for it?
I think they really wouldn't stand for it. Well, the British public wouldn't stand for it. I mean, poll after poll has showed they're really opposed to these kind of products entering the British market. And also, I don't think the UK farming sector would stand for it. The UK government's currently in a kind of dispute with the British farmers over changes to inheritance tax. The farming lobby has kind of exaggerated this because most farms in the UK won't be paying inheritance tax, even though it's been imposed on like really big farms. But at the moment, it's probably the worst possible time for the British government to get into a dispute with its own agricultural sector. And so I think it's very unlikely that Keir Starmer and the UK government will take up the US on that sort of preferential trade offer, even if it was actually offered. And obviously we don't know yet what the Trump administration will actually do.
So which would cost the UK economy more, failing to address the gap caused by Brexit, or the 20% tariffs that Trump is threatening on all goods imported into the US?
Well, I would say that the UK needs a closer trading relationship with the EU more than it needs a closer trading relationship with the US. And so, I mean, even if we went along with some of what the US or Trump was suggesting, Trump is a very kind of capricious and wild card character, very difficult to second guess. His policy is probably going to lead to significant costs for the US economy, probably boost inflation in the US. So we may find that in a few years, the US economy is currently doing better than the EU in terms of growth of GDP per head, but after a couple of years of Trump, that might no longer be the case. So the EU might begin to look like a much better option for the UK. And obviously we had Brexit, which was a big kind of case of shooting ourselves in the foot. Whilst I don't think we'll be able to rejoin the EU anytime soon we can at least push for a closer trading relationship with the EU, and I think that's definitely what the UK should do.
I wanted to ask you about that. If Trump imposes these 20% import tariffs on all goods coming from the EU, to what extent does the EU need trade with Britain, to the extent that they possibly will give Britain more favourable trading conditions?
Well, we might get more favourable trading conditions, but that deal is going to come with significant strings attached if we get a deal of that nature. And I think it would probably be in the UK's best interest to reject that and instead push for closer trading links with the EU, which is already a much bigger trading partner for the UK than the US is. So we'll probably end up getting 20% tariffs across the board for both UK companies selling into the US and EU companies selling into the US, but we may be able to offset that with better trading arrangements with the EU, because the Brexit we got in 2019-2020 was a pretty hard Brexit, and our trading status with the EU isn't that great right now, and we should really be looking to improve that.
Really good to talk to you, Howard, on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thanks very much. Nice to be here. Thanks.
The return of Donald Trump is also expected to reshape relations between Washington and China. As you heard, Beijing could face up to 60% tariffs on its exports to the US, but a Chinese-backed megaport in Peru could create new routes that will bypass North America entirely. The project is part of China's push to increase its influence in Latin America, traditionally seen as the US backyard. But last week, the presidents of Peru and China inaugurated the $3.5 billion Chancay port, which is intended to boost trade in the Asia-Pacific region. Peru is hoping the joint venture will transform it into the largest trading hub in South America. The Sarah Gill reports.
A once small fishing village has been transformed into a mega port city. The $3.5 billion private venture between China and Peru is the start of a new global trade partnership. It's one that Peru's leader hopes will transform the country.
Peru will be key in the maritime routes of global trade, which will turn into more investments, more trade and development for our country.
Let's skip that.
The port's construction.
All right, let's go to CNN here.
Luis Moreno Ocampo is a lawyer who served as the first prosecutor of the ICC from 2003 to 2012. Rosa Friedman is professor of law, conflict, and global development.
So we're going to be going over the ICC issue with Netanyahu, but before we do that, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the resveratrol. This is an antioxidant, and it's a great way to soak up free radicals and get rid of senescent cells. And I have the Goodnight formula, which is really important to take, on a regular basis or daily if you're having problems sleeping. It has tryptophan and melatonin in it, and many other, supplements that'll help for you to have a restful sleep, consolidate memory, detoxify your central nervous system, and go into REM cycle sleep, which is really important to consolidate the memory. So please go to my store, take the Goodnight formula, and good restful sleep regularly is going to slow down the aging process. In addition, there's research out there that suggests that chronic sleep deprivation could lead to early issues with dementia. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Goodnight formula and the resveratrol. And lastly, omega-3, very important to lower your LDL levels and increase your HDL levels to improve your total cholesterol. Omega-3 you can take every day to help improve your cardiovascular health. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the omega-3 to lower your LDL levels and to increase your HDL levels.
Reading, good to have you both. Before we get into the mechanics, sir, let's start with you. Can you just take us through what has been going on in the months since we got the news that the chief prosecutor was seeking these arrest warrants? I mean, these are controversial. There is an enormous amount of pressure on the ICC at present. the Israelis calling this decision absurd and anti-Semitic. Others who support this decision by the ICC suggesting it is not at all political and should be adhered to. Luis Ocampo, your sense, if you will, just walk us through how we got to this point and the sort of pressure the ICC is under at this stage.
Well, start with the crime, because it's very limited to the starvation part of the campaign. The ICC is not making findings for bombing or genocide. It's just a very limited charge, starvation. And everyone knows starvation happens because Mr. Galan openly said from the beginning they will do it. And President Biden spent 1 year begging to Israel to let food and water to go. So the facts are non-controversial. And the legal characterization was, okay, it's a war crime of starvation. And the judges said you cannot use starvation to attack civilians, to combat Hamas. So, and that's very clear. Israel can stop this tomorrow, Becky. Israel can stop this tomorrow. How? If Israel starts today a real investigation against Prime Minister Netanyahu, the case will be stopped in the ICC because the ICC acts when the national country does act. So, if not go to political consideration, Israel wants to stop this, well, do the case yourself. That's it.
Well, the US, I quote here, just crossing the wires now, fundamentally rejects the ICC arrest warrant decision and is discussing the next steps. We know that in discussion over the past months, these next steps could include sanctions against the ICC. Rosa, before I come to you, Luis Ocampo, your response.
Well, President Biden was begging Prime Minister Netanyahu not to commit crimes, and now he said, okay, but I don't care what that he said. I think it was a mistake, but I think President Trump is a very smart person, so he will find alternatives, because it's ridiculous that U.S. go against the world, expose itself protecting crimes, when Israel can stop this tomorrow. Prime Minister Netanyahu knows very well that he can stop this tomorrow, just allowing a national investigation in Israel. So why the U.S. will go ballistic against the world when it's an easy solution for this, open investigation in Israel? So I think it's something to consider. The U.S. leadership will be seriously compromised here if U.S. tries to attack the ICC, because the war is with the ICC in this case.
This administration, of course, has only got 2 months left to run, but it's very likely that these threats of sanctions against the ICC to completely sort of discredit the ICC are likely to come from a Donald Trump administration in spades. Rosa, let me bring you in. At least I'll bring you back in a moment. Let's just talk about what these arrest warrants practically mean. What are the next steps here?
So the arrest warrants have been issued, but remember, Israel is not party to the International Criminal Court. So Israel is not under any duty internationally to send Gallant or Netanyahu to the court. What it does mean is that if they were to travel to any of the 124 states that are party to the ICC, they could be arrested. Those states should arrest them and send them to The Hague. We have seen in the past that arrest warrants have been issued and people have travelled with those arrest warrants into ICC state parties and not been arrested. So it's a political as well as a legal decision. But the next stage will really be what the court decides to do. Now, it can't try in absentia. It needs to have Gallant and Netanyahu in front of it in order for any trial to take place. And let's be clear, these are arrest warrants that have been issued. They've not decided that there's enough evidence to prosecute and to find them guilty. We have to have due process. We have to have a fair trial. They're simply saying that they think there is sufficient evidence to arrest them, or, as my colleague was saying, for a national investigation to take place.
Could and should were two words that you used there. Could and should if Benjamin Netanyahu and or Yoav Gallant travel to a country that is signatory to the Rome Statute, that is the statute that set up the ICC, if they traveled there, they could and should be arrested. But as you rightly point out, in the past, there have been those with arrest warrants who have not been arrested in these countries. There is no mechanism, is there, to actually arrest anybody who is under warrant from the ICC, correct?
Well, the mechanism would be that they would be arrested if they could be arrested if they were in a country that was party, kidnapped and taken to The Hague from Israel, which is not a state party. And really what's been said by the Americans, just to chime in on the question you asked my colleague, what's been said by the Americans is this issuing of an arrest warrant for a democratically elected leader, as compared with all the other democratically elected leaders that, for example, went into Raqqa and Mosul recently to fight ISIS, or Tony Blair and George Bush for the Iraq War and things like that, looks like a politicized decision. So it actually probably will be a political decision of each country that's party to the ICC, whether they uphold these arrest warrants or not, given how contentious they are.
Right. These arrest warrants are against Netanyahu and Gallant for crimes against humanity and war crimes committed from at least the 8th of October 2023 until at least May 2023. That is the day that the prosecution filed the application for warrants of arrest. Louisa Campo, you said all that needs to happen is that Israel stops what I described, you know, in these arrest warrants as crimes against humanity at present. Are you suggesting that if the war stopped tomorrow, if there were a ceasefire tomorrow, that the IC would not pursue this case any further? I just want to be quite clear about where you stand.
Stopping the crimes is necessary, but will be not enough to stop the investigation. To stop the investigation, to stop the warrant, is needed to start an investigation in Israel. So a criminal prosecutor in Israel or a commission of inquiry in Israel investigating Netanyahu for crimes against humanity and war crimes. That is the measure to stop that. And that way, for me, I don't think this is politically, because the court also indicted President Putin. The court could indict Maduro. So the court is in the US, you see as friends or enemies. The court see as criminals, not criminals. That is a different standard. And so that's why I think it's very important for President Trump to understand, okay, if you want to do something with Maduro, the court could help you. So don't try to attack the court. And also, when you say about legitimacy, I think who is losing legitimacy here will be the US attacking the court. Because when you see there is discussions in the world is incredibly sad what happened in Palestine. So the idea to stop this is important. And until today, President Biden did not have zero influence. So I think what we need now is stop the crimes, stop the bombing, and to solve the issue of Netanyahu, please organize an investigation in Israel. That is legally will make the ICC stop the case. Right. That has to be very clear.
All right. So there's further investigation on Netanyahu and Gallant at the ICC, and obviously the United States is, going to try to go against that. So please go to my store, thought-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the ubiquinol. This is the best bioavailable CoQ10 that you can get. So go to my store, get the ubiquinol. Ubiquinol is really important to boost up your energy levels. It's an antioxidant. It's synergistic with C60. It'll soak up free radicals. And it also helps to protect your neurons. Very important as you get older. I've been taking ubiquinol for a long time. Many years, decades. So, it's really important to take CoQ10, and ubiquinol is the best bioavailable CoQ10 you can get. Vitamin B complex, very important to take. Helps with cell metabolism. It also helps with your electron transport chain to help boost up energy. And it helps with neurons. As you get older, your neurons don't function as well, and you're going to need vitamin B to the different vitamin Bs to help protect those neurons. So please go to my store and get the vitamin B complex. And Biotrol, very important to maintain your muscle mass, increase muscle mass, especially when you get older. This also helps to improve your mitochondria. So these are all synergistic. And, you know, Biotrol is synergistic with vitamin B complex and the ubiquinol. All right. But Biotrol will help build muscle, maintain muscle, very important as you get older. And let's say that you're an athlete or you work out regularly. Taking Biotrol is going to help you build muscle. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. It also has lignans in it, so it will help to reduce inflammation and soak up free radicals as you're working out. So that's important too. It has flavonoids and polyphenols in this. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Biotrol. Okay. All right, what's going on with Bloomberg here? All right, see what happens. The Unilever is spinning off something.
Be potentially down. So I think that sounds like a sensible number. We've been telling you to do about 3% again, which is pretty much what you get for a food company, frankly. Looking at global GDP and population growth, what you get.
So is the path of least resistance for a company like this big, and I'm also kind of thinking about Nestle too, like just the really huge European consumer giants. Is it going to be about trimming fat? Is it going to be about slimming down and not be this massive conglomerate, but be more specialized?
Well, it's interesting. As you said that some of the personnel they were potentially going to let go from the overall business has been put into the ice cream business there. We don't know a lot of the details on that at the moment, but as I say, you've got a very big distribution network, frozen food, which needs people to deliver to millions of small shop owners around the world. You know, where you've got those Unilevers, basically Unilever freezers, so to drive that impulse business, which is where you make the margin. It's very difficult to take tax out of that. But I think that's part of the reason why maybe private equity didn't see eye to eye on value. But actually, if you get that right, and you've got the product in place when people want to buy it, then you can make significant money. So I think it's just really about getting the innovation right, making sure the product is where it should be, and actually just achieving what a good business should do. Which, to be fair, I think on the whole, the ice cream business have done. Probably do very well, I'm afraid.
All right, Duncan, thanks so much for joining us. Ice cream business, who knew? Duncan Fox, consumer staples analyst, Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us via Zoom from somewhere over in Southwest England. I'm calling it Dorset. Why be in London when you could be in Dorset, Southwest England?
All right, yeah, take it. Why not?
The ice cream business, kind of a GDP kind of growth business. So I didn't know there was the year-to-year fluctuations based upon weather. I didn't know that was a
thing. No, I didn't know that was a thing either.
Interesting. All right, so we're gonna have more coming up, but that was a good couple hours here on Bloomberg Intelligence. We're taking a look at the earnings, pretty much wrapped up for global Wall Street here. Now I think probably the focus goes back to kind of some news out of Washington, D.C., policy on economic policy and others, as well as some of the global economic news. And
so they're going on commercial.
Let's see over the coming weeks. All
right, what does Stephen Miller have to say about Trump?
Incoming White House Deputy Chief of Policy, Stephen Miller, is with us. Stephen, how are you?
I am good, Sean, my old friend. After 9 years, we are here on the heels of a landslide like the world has never seen before, prepared under President Trump's leadership to implement historical, transformative, long-awaited change to make this government accountable to the people of this country once again. It will be, as Donald Trump said, a new golden age for America.
I want to go through how dramatic this is going to be, because what I hear the president is proposing, and look at Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, And they're setting up this new department, and they're going to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. And they're going to cut, they pledged to cut by July 4th, 2026, $2 trillion in federal spending. That is a monumental task. And there are ways to do it. I think one way to do it would be to increase revenues. That would be through energy dominance. That's a separate topic. But this is transformative, what the president's talking about. For the first time, we've heard conservatives for years talk about limited government, cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. And now somebody, for the first time in my adult life, if you will, to catch a phrase, I'm believing it's going to happen. How real is that they're going to cut to that extent?
Well, the president has put together the dream team. And you just mentioned two members of the dream team. So you have the Department of Government Efficiency that from the outside is going to direct and organize this extraordinary effort to remove all of the waste and the corruption from the federal government. So they will do that in concert and in league with the White House, President Trump, the Office of Management and Budget. Here's the shocking truth, Sean. The departments do not have any clue where the dollars are going. How many audits has the Pentagon failed? Who has any idea how much waste and abuse there is in the trillions of dollars spent by this federal government? Who has any idea how many hundreds of billions of dollars every year are stolen from taxpayers by fraud rings, scammers, foreign operatives? This government is not watching how your dollars are being spent. And President Trump has commissioned Elon and Vivek and many others across the government to get to the bottom of this. So the money that you earn as an American citizen will be jealously treasured and guarded and not wasted any longer. And we're going to go into these agencies and find everybody who is not performing on behalf of the American public. And we're going to say, if you're not providing that service, if you're not serving the public, then you can go.
The border has been a big issue. How quickly, in your estimation, can that border get secure, number one? And we have known terrorists in the country. We have people that have murdered Americans. We have the Lake and Riley trial going on right now. Dozens of dead Americans murdered by Harris Biden, unvetted illegals. We have dozens of Americans raped, hundreds and hundreds of victims of violent crime. We have gang members. We have cartel members in this country. How quickly do we secure the border? How quickly do we deport those that are criminal aliens in the country?
It's going to be at light speed, Sean. The moment that President Trump puts his hand on that Bible and takes the oath of office, as he has said, the occupation ends, Liberation Day begins. He will immediately sign executive orders, sealing the border shut, beginning the largest deportation operation in American history, finding the criminal gangs, rapists, drug dealers, and monsters that have murdered our citizens and sending them home. No one will be allowed to enter the country illegally, and ICE will be empowered in partnership with FBI, DEA, ATF, the National Guard, to fully seal and secure the border with CBP and to find and identify the criminal threats that are inside this country and send them back home. We saw that heartbreaking testimony, Sean. Laken Riley, that precious, beautiful young woman, fought for her life against an illegal alien imported by Biden-Harris. For 18 harrowing minutes, she fought for her life. And we are going to honor that extraordinary woman. And we're going to honor every victim who has suffered. Under President Trump's leadership, you're going to honor that suffering by unleashing a righteous wave of justice and sending these criminal migrants back home.
How do we ensure that the weaponization of the Department of Justice never happens in this country again? And that means it shouldn't happen to Republicans. It shouldn't happen to Democrats. How do we get rid of political operatives that have deviated from their original mission, that are inside important groups like the FBI or our intelligence community? How do we find those actors that are loyal to Clapper and Brennan and Comey, the deep state operatives, as we call them?
Well, dismantling the deep state and restoring democracy is going to be another urgent day one mission. Look, the Department of Justice and the intelligence community has undermined and sabotaged our democracy. They've tried to stop Donald Trump through third state despotic means. President Trump winning this election has also won a mandate to fundamentally reform the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the entire intelligence community. Tulsi Gabbard at the Directorate of National Intelligence will lead the effort to find those bad actors and to ensure that the intelligence collection process across all 18 intelligence agencies is done only to protect Americans, not to persecute them. At the same time, Matt Gaetz at the Department of Justice will reform DOJ to turn it again into the world's premier crime-fighting organization, not an arm of the Democrat Party. And we will find an FBI director who is going to likewise lead an effort to get the FBI back to basics, find criminals, find cartels, find gangs, find terrorists, and put them in jail or send them home. But do not use the awesome powers of the FBI to try to rig our democracy, as has happened in recent years. This is why President Trump is indeed the greatest champion of democracy in modern American history, because he weathered the attacks, he withstood the assaults, and now he stands here on the verge of taking the oath of office, prepared to make these agencies, make departments once more answerable and loyal to the citizens of this country and to no other interest but them.
If there are some cabinet appointments that become troublesome, will the president use the recess appointment process?
Yes, the president has won a mandate and he will use all lawful constitutional means to fulfill that mandate on behalf of the people who voted for him in record numbers.
All right, Stephen Miller, are you getting a new office this time? Just checking.
It should be a nice office, Sean, but that's not what I'm focused on. We just want to get the job done.
No, get a bigger one this time. That's my humble.
Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the vitamin D. Vitamin D is vitamin D3 is very important as a gene expression cofactor. It helps with cellular processes. It also helps to get cells to go into apoptosis. And vitamin D3 helps with calcium absorption. Vitamin D3 is synergistic with K2, MK7. So vitamin K2 that I have on my store now is great. It's a dual purpose product. It helps with cardiovascular health, but also with bone health. So please get the vitamin K2, take it every day, and get it with the D3. They're synergistic. You're going to get better results. Please go to my store, get the K2 and the D3. Great stack. And nattokinase. Nattokinase is a great supplement to take. It lowers LDL levels and increases your HDL levels. And it's fibrinolytic, so it reduces the chance of clot formation. So please go to my store, take nattokinase on a daily basis to improve your cardiovascular health. And these are synergistic, all right? Nattokinase, K2, and D3. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the supplements. All right, let's see what Nikki Haley has to say about Tulsi.
Welcome to the wonderful world of Wilton, where anything is possible. A place where you're free to...
This is not a place for a Russian, Iranian, Syrian, Chinese sympathizer. DNI has to analyze real threats. Are we comfortable with someone like that at the top of our national intelligence agencies?
Donald Trump's
now that was her podcast. That's Nikki Haley's podcast. All right. Now, Nikki Haley's all about herself. It was obvious during the primary. She's aligned herself with the deep state to try to deep six the candidacy of Trump. When she was in the administration for Trump, first term, she was always trying to promote herself. If you don't believe me, just read Pompeo's book or read Jared's memoir. And I'm telling you, Nikki Haley is all about herself, and she's aligned herself with the deep state. She's pissed off that she wasn't brought into the second term for Trump's administration. And she's going to try to demonize another woman that seems to be America first. You know what, Nikki Haley, you got some serious issues. Of course, CNN will promote her.
National Intelligence, Nikki Haley, who of course took on Trump in the primary, but then ultimately endorsed him, criticized Tulsi Gabbard for meeting with Syria's Bashar al-Assad and argued that Gabbard repeated Russian talking points. Gabbard, a former Democrat, left the party in 2022, and she's since become a staunch supporter of Trump, serving on his transition team. If confirmed by the Senate, Gabbard would become the head of the nation's intelligence agencies. Her confirmation, though, might be an uphill battle.
If we bring in somebody like this who smells to other intelligence agencies like someone who will compromise their sources and methods and be far too cozy with Russia and other adversaries, then they're going to hold back information that could be really.
Think about that. If we are a little worried about how other agencies may have, an opinion on Tulsi, then, maybe we shouldn't have her on. The whole point of bringing her on is to restructure the national security state because it's gotten out of control. Just like how Stephen Miller was talking about, you know what, you're wasting taxpayer dollars and we need to start truncating bloated government. This is the same problem, but it's even more nefarious because the national security state wants power and erode your constitutional freedoms. If you don't believe me, that's exactly what happened right after 9/11. And oh, by the way, as technology starts to come online with AI and the internet, and high speed, cabling and all this stuff, right? They can do track and tracing more. They can, surveil the citizens more. Why does the NSA need to build a gigantic server farm to collect your data and use your taxpayer dollars to erode your constitutional freedoms? You know what? I want people to truncate the NSA. This guy obviously has been compromised. I don't know who he's been butt fucking, but it's obvious that he's compromised.
Critical to our success. This is a choice that actually puts Americans at risk because we won't have access to intelligence that could be critical to our safety. I think Republicans will likely begin to come around.
So this is one of those picks, Alex, that
see what it is. The national security state goes to the senators, and they're basically saying, we don't like this person because they're not inculcated with our culture of eroding your constitutional freedoms. So make sure that you deny them. The national security state needs to be gutted, absolutely gutted.
Mike, you alluded to this, right? It's fallen kind of off out of the headlines in many ways because of the salacious things going on with other cabinet picks. But Tulsi Gabbard is someone who, and in fact, let me just play this.
Get it out of your mouth, honey.
Back in 2019 about Bashar al-Assad, and I asked her if she thinks that he was an enemy of the United States. Here's what she said. Take a look. Do you think Assad is our enemy?
Assad is not the enemy of the United States because Syria does not pose a direct threat to the United States.
Now, of course, why that comment and framing is noteworthy, especially in this context, is because of the ties between Assad and the Russians and the realities of where we are now. Is there a world where there is a national security contingent in this?
What about the plan right after 9/11 to try to take over Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya? They had a plan right after 9/11. And we had our intelligence agencies doing nefarious things to try to set the Middle East on fire. The problem is we have a rogue national security state. That's the problem.
that start to take this
So it's gonna be
nomination
Russia,
more
Russia.
seriously?
Yes, because she is one of the biggest critics of the current, not just national security state, but sort of American foreign policy establishment that you've had in many, many decades for perhaps, ever. Like the only thing I can even think close to is, the 70s post-church committee stuff. And that's why you're going to see people like Mitch McConnell take a very, very close look at her record. But, for Trump's base, the fact that she's getting criticized by Nikki Haley is a feature, not a bug. This is why people like Tucker Carlson and stuff have really gravitated towards Tulsi Gabbard, because they see her as sort of a wrecking ball to what they see as a national security state off the rails.
Yeah, well, our reporting this morning, Mike, is that Tulsi Gabbard is at odds with the community she may soon be tasked with leading because of her distrust of broad government surveillance authorities and her support for those willing to expose some of the intelligence community's most sensitive secrets. I mean, the stakes here are incredibly high.
They are incredibly high, and to Alex's point, I think there's some of the things that we
You know what
forget
the
that
stakes
we're
are?
talking about,
The stakes aren't incredibly high with putting Tulsi in as DNI, as a District of National Intelligence. That's not what we need to worry about. We need to worry about the out of control national security state leading us into wars. Most of the fucking wars that we have had in my lifetime is because of the fucking CIA.
Jules being nominated is that there's a difference between a messenger and a manager. And I don't think that she's been nominated to be a manager of DNI. She's been nominated to be a messenger.
Power, right?
Absolutely not. But we also forget that there are also a dozen other political nominees that will come in.
Tulsi is not the risk. The risk is maintaining the status quo with the national security state. Gut it. Gut it. And you're not going to get someone in there that's been inculcated with the normal process, that's willing to do the organizational changes that need to happen to make this world a safer place and to make America a more prosperous nation.
Is to run it. But again, going back to the point, for not a feature, not a bug, she absolutely personifies a lot of what the Trump campaign was saying vis-a-vis the defense industry, but also the national intelligence.
What's wrong with
I
that?
think a lot of these nominations, whether it be Gaetz at DOJ or Tulsi Gabbard, it's a way of the Trump administration to say this time it's going to be different. Whether she makes it through, because there's a lot of hurdles for her to get through in the Senate, is another question.
The one thing I will say is I absolutely agree, because Donald Trump himself is the one who's been having phone calls with Vladimir Putin. I mean, so
Russia.
Such a stretch. We're all talking about her as if she is in isolation. The fact that he is nominating her.
I'm going to commercial. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the multivitamin. You need this multivitamin. It's easy to digest. It's really important to take every day. Multivitamins are cofactors for enzymatic activity, so you need that for proper cellular processes. So, and this is easy to digest, so please go to my store and get the multivitamin. Vitamin C, really important to take on a daily basis, especially during the cold season. If you're not feeling so well during the cold season, take a double dose, drink it with filtered water.
A lot about Donald Trump's priorities and what he wants in that role. And that should be the concern.
And it's not new. Donald Trump was president before, and when he was, he actually sided in one instance with Vladimir Putin over our own intelligence services, not to mention the fact that he himself has endangered national security. He is the president-elect, he gets to pick, but the pattern here is loyalists to Donald Trump and his agenda, and we should be very concerned about that when we're talking about national security.
Former presidential candidate Nikki
Wait
Haley
a minute.
the latest voice.
You had a big percentage of the Electoral College in the popular vote that said, we want Trump's policies. And now you have CNN, who's in bed with CIA, saying, we don't care what the American people think. We want to maintain the status quo post 9/11. never have a sunset of the awesome power that the national security state has been given.
Former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, President-elect Donald Trump's pick for Director of National Intelligence.
DNI, Department of National Intelligence. This is not a place for a Russian, Iranian, Syrian, Chinese sympathizer. After Russia invaded Ukraine,
Can you say that she is really upset that she wasn't brought in? And so she's going to use her podcast, Nikki Haley Live, promoting the national security state and trying to demonize Trump. They already set her up on Sirius Radio. All right. So for our next 4 years, she's going to be nothing but anti-Trump, pro-national security state, so she can fucking run in 2028.
blamed
What a
NATO.
piece of shit.
Our Western alliance is responsible for countering Russia.
CNN's Katie Bo Lillis joining me now. Katie Bo, you've got some new reporting for us on Gabbard's history of really being at odds with the agencies that she could soon lead. What are you learning?
Yeah, Sarah, what's really fascinating about Gabbard is that if confirmed, she will be perhaps the most markedly or most publicly anti-surveillance official to ever lead the part of the U.S. government that is tasked with doing surveillance on foreign entities. In 2020, back when she was still a Democrat and she was in Congress, she introduced a series of bills that would have been pretty profoundly antithetical to how the intelligence community thinks. Two of them were aimed at persuading the government to drop its prosecution of Edward Snowden, the former National Security Agency contractor who revealed the existence of both
Snowden and Assange showed to the American public the problems with the national security state. Unfortunately, we had many people in our government that tried to silence them, not just with their speech, but of their life. The national security state is out of control. And oh, by the way, the crisis that we went through in 2020, oh, the national security state was a big part of it. A big part of it. All right. The crisis that we went through in 2020, guess what? They went to social media. They went to mainstream media and they try to silence people like me.
State collection of Americans' data back in 2013, as well as of Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks. Both of these men are seen really as almost enemies of the state within the intelligence community, even as they've attracted some support from kind of the sort of libertarian wing of the Republican Party, as well as some progressives in the Democratic Party. Gabbard also in 2020 introduced this piece of legislation that would have wholesale repealed one of the most powerful surveillance authorities that the U.S. government has to spy on foreigners overseas, something called Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Now, that is legislation that has drawn some criticism from civil liberties advocates who say that it impinges on Americans' data privacy as well. But to wholesale repeal it without replacing it would be tantamount, according to some former U.S. intelligence officials, to effectively blinding the commander-in-chief. This is an authority under which as much as half of what's known as the president's daily brief is drawn from every day.
Most of the time, the CIA gets it wrong because they're incompetent. But because of their incompetence, they lead us into wars. All right? Where is the weapons of mass destruction that still hasn't been found in Iraq? Because it never existed. I'm telling you, they want, and this is the worry that I have with a potential tactical nuke going off in Europe. It's the national security state will start putting pressure on the senators to push legislation so they can maintain power. I would not put it past them. We're in dangerous times right now because the national security state sees that with the Trump administration, with the right people put in, that their power is going to be truncated. And there's going to be a major restructuring, and they may orchestrate something to try to keep that power. But the enemy of our country, the enemy of the state, the enemy of the United States of America is the national security state. It's an existential threat on our constitutional freedoms.
So whether or not Gabbard, as DNI, would be able to actually kind of dismantle this program unilaterally, probably a really logistical task, a really logistically difficult task that would face a lot of pushback. But it really speaks to this kind of profound distrust that she has in the intelligence community and the people that collect intelligence on foreign entities in ways that could potentially.
And they abused it. They abused it and used it on American citizens, and then lied to Congress about it, and then asked for money to build server farms in Arizona or Utah, I forgot where, so they can collect your data. Just keep on collecting it, keep on collecting it, keep on collecting it, keep on collecting it. Meanwhile, we have a bunch of fucking idiots that are on social media being keyboard warriors, and we got one of the biggest issues. You know what some of the biggest issues that we have in our country? Wasting the American taxpayer dollars, being poisoned with our air, food, and water, the bio weapon development and the chemical weapon development that's taking place, the Damocles of nuclear holocaust that's been over our heads since World War II, and a runaway, a rogue national security state. So all these keyboard warriors are thinking that they're so smart. You know what? If you don't solve these fucking issues that I just mentioned, you're a fucking idiot.
Community gathers and spies. It gathers information and spies on American adversaries, Sarah.
All right, Katie Bo-Lillis, thank you for that reporting.
Yeah. Let's get our check from CIA. All right, here we go with another. Russia's
foreign ministry is saying Moscow could target a major Western military base in Poland. That was opened on the Baltic coast earlier this month and is part of a larger NATO missile shield. Well, CNN contributor Jill Doherty, a former CNN Moscow bureau chief, joins us now to look at what are.
This is the point that I'm making. How the national security state is walking us right into World War III. Tiptoeing right into World War III. And guess what? When it does happen, the citizens will lose power. The national security state will gain power. And it's a lot harder to uproot this because of all the technology that we love.
Story. And we'll talk about what feels like a creeping escalation, certainly, in this war in a moment. Firstly, how do you assess what happened
BBC
overnight?
just announced.
Jill, what's the message here?
BBC just announced. Putin says Russia hit Ukraine with a new type of missile days after Ukraine used Western supplied weapons to strike inside Russia. All right. Thank you, National Security State, for inching us towards World War III. And CNN is trying to tell you that Tulsi is the danger. Really, lovely.
Well, depending upon what kind of a missile that is, and if it isn't an ICBM, and that would be worrying because usually ICBMs, as Nick pointed out, have a nuclear payload. Those are the big ones that go across the oceans. But whatever it was, it's very obvious that Russia is furious. And why it's furious is because of President Biden's decision to allow Ukraine to use U.S. weapons, nuclear ATACMS, to strike inside Russia. That Putin said a long time ago is a red line, and now it's been crossed. So the Russians are signaling, and they're really furiously signaling, that this is not going to stand, that they won't put up with it, and they're going to retaliate in some fashion. I mean, I think, Becky, there's a lot of, as they say, signaling going on, and the signaling really now is kinetic. You can see actions being taken to send messages. But I think the timing is really important. You have President Biden leaving office in 2 months. And then you have another president, Trump, coming in who says, I'm going to end the war, as soon as I get into office. And that timing is really important. So Biden is pulling out all the stops in trying to help Ukraine. And that, of course, is having a reaction in Moscow, which we can talk about, from President Putin.
Yeah, and this week, of course, starting with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's call to President Putin at the beginning of the week. And we are closing out a week with this, bookending a week when the US and Britain, it seems, fired missiles into Russia for the first time. The thinking then, given your background and your understanding of what goes on at the Kremlin, the threats against a base in Poland and other threats being made against Europe at this point mean what at this point, very specifically?
There's a news announcement saying that Matt Gaetz withdraws from consideration.
I think, we have to point out that the United States has not fired on Russia, but Russia considers itself at war with the West. And that's it sounds like semantics, but it really isn't. I mean, Russia does feel that. So I think what Russia is saying is we are going to do everything that we can to signal to the United States that you are involved in the war directly. And so you have, what did you have? President Putin, just on the 1000th day of the war, there's an announcement that the nuclear policy, the strategy of Russia is changing. And that would it's always allowed Russia to respond to conventional attacks that are very major, threat to Russia, to respond to nuclear powers that are using conventional weapons. But now they're saying, if there's a country, and we could say, let's say Ukraine, which is not a nuclear country, but it takes an action, it attacks Russia, and it is supported by a nuclear country, the United States, then that gives Russia the right to respond with nuclear weapons. So we're getting into the territory of very, really direct threats here. And I think it's a very dramatic and very dangerous moment because of not only the words, but the potential for this to spin out of control, sometimes because it wasn't planned. Their mistakes can happen as well.
So you rightly pointed out that Joe Biden has 2 months left in office. President Donald Trump's son.
God, these people are so dumb. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the structural nanosilver gels. I have 2 types. I have it in the quick dispenser that you can carry in your bag, and I have it in a tube. They're both very high quality. You use them the same way. They're dual purpose. You can improve your skin by using it every day. Put it on at night. When you wake up, exfoliate. You'll notice your skin's clearer and tighter, especially around your face. In addition, you can help heal a wound, an abrasion, a minor burn, and you can neutralize pathogens by putting it around your mouth, your eyes, your ears, your nose. Lightly coat your nostrils and put it on your hands. Stays active for 5.5 hours. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the structural nanosilver gels either in the dispenser or in the tube form.
Reacting to Joe Biden's decision over the weekend to greenlight the Ukrainians to use American-made missiles deeper into Russia, I want to quote his son here. Quote, the military-industrial complex seems to want to make sure they get World War III going.
Okay, so BBC confirms the announcement with Bloomberg. Matt Gaetz withdraws as Donald Trump's nominee for Attorney General, saying he doesn't want to be a distraction. This is big.
As a chance to create peace and save lives, end quote. Now, experts say it won't make a decisive military difference in what Joe Biden has decided to do. But it certainly, as you have rightly pointed out, escalated action on the part of the Russians, although some will say the US and Ukraine simply reacting to Russian aggression. But certainly we are seeing this creeping escalation. What chance that Trump can settle this war as he has promised to do, and what damage to any potential for a solution?
It takes so
here?
long to get a question out. It's really simple. If the national security state has their way, they're going to try to prevent Trump from having peace in Europe.
What damage wrought by what we are seeing at present?
Well, I mean, if you listen to what Trump's son is saying, that actually sounds like what the Russians are saying, which is we are creeping, actually running close to World War III. Now, the debate in the Biden administration throughout the war has been, well, maybe it is dangerous to escalate, and maybe we should be careful. And so they've held off on getting certain weapons. You know, eventually maybe they did, but there was a lot of temporizing in the beginning. And so the debate is Putin bluffing, or could he really use nuclear weapons? That's essentially what the debate
I think
is.
he could use them.
And I think the decision, at least the Biden administration, has been that no, he's not going to use nuclear weapons in the sense of intercontinental, nuclear weapons striking the United States and Russia.
He's not going to use it against the United States. But he can use it in Europe. And here's the problem. Then the national security state is going to go to Congress and they're going to ask for more power. Because we're in an emergency. That's a major issue. They're trying to prevent Trump from restructuring the national security state. And they're going to use this conflict in Europe to do it.
It's still a lot more fraught than it was, just a few weeks ago. And then you have Trump coming in and saying, I can solve it. It'll be over, in a day, with very few details. But the biggest details that seem to be there are Ukraine gives up territory in order to placate Russia, and there's some sort of an agreement. And so far, Ukraine is saying, that's not going to happen. We do not agree to that. So again, we're at a very dramatic moment. And I think what's really odd about it is that you have, from the United States, two positions there. The official position, which is Biden, and then the unofficial, but soon to be an official approach by Trump coming in. So it could be confusing, et cetera. And that gives a lot of possibility of sending these messages and threats and, and even action, like whatever that was, whatever it was certainly a step up from what the Russians have been using. So there we are, and it is very complex.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've done an extremely good job in your analysis and insight as ever.
Yeah, and she takes forever to say a question. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Max 35 or the Max 14. Take a teaspoon of it a day, swish it in your mouth, gargle, swallow it. I do it every day. It'll neutralize pathogens, maintain the mucosal barrier in your oral cavity. It'll improve your oral hygiene. And it's a part of one of my pillars. It's the first part of the pillar of slowing down the aging process and having longevity. Structural nanosilver, taking structural nanosilver as the first pillar, taking the turmeric and ashwagandha to bring down inflammation. The second pillar and the third pillar is to take strong antioxidants like C60. Those are the three pillars to slow down the aging process. And when you do that on a regular basis, you're going to have more energy and you're going to have more vitality. But you stack other stuff to it and you're going to really supercharge it. And that's what I do. What I tell you to take is what I take. All right. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the Max 35 or the Max 14. And lastly, I have a great toothpaste. It's a structural nano silver toothpaste. It has no fluoride in it. This toothpaste is going to be the best toothpaste that you can buy, way better than anything that else Jones sells. Help support my work. I still get strikes all the time, especially when I start talking about things that are starting to happen in California that you need to worry about, like Clade 1B. But please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Help support my work and get the toothpaste. This is a great toothpaste. All right. It whitens your teeth, freshens your breath, reduces inflammation at the gum line. It helps to improve your gum line. That's very important when you get older. And by having good oral hygiene, you're reducing the chances of cardiovascular disease and you're reducing your chances of valvular disease. A lot of people don't understand that, bacteria and infections can cause irritation on the valve of the heart. And over time, the valve can become diseased. And when that happens, you can have regurgitations and you can have prolapses. In addition, you can have also stenosis with the accumulation of calcium in these irritated areas on the valve. You don't want that. All right. Big problem. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Improve your oral hygiene. Get the structural nano silver toothpaste. That's the end of my broadcast. Well, before I do the end of my broadcast, let's just play a little bit of the Matt Gaetz issue where he stepped down from being a nominee.
Well, the Trump-Vance transition, he says, no time to waste on a needlessly protracted Washington scuffle. And the scuffle was already well underway. It was set this time yesterday. We were talking about the Ethics Committee in the U.S. House meeting at an undisclosed location to vote on whether to release its report into Matt Gaetz and the salacious allegations against him that he has denied. No resolution, no agreement, split down the middle, report still under wraps. But there's now a Democratic-led effort in the U.S. House to have this made public. Sean Casten, who was with us just 2 days ago, Democrat from Illinois. That's pretty strong words about Matt Gaetz and Donald Trump in our conversation, has brought a privileged resolution to the floor, easy for me to say, that will force a vote, a full House vote, on whether to make the ethics report public. Now that starts the clock. You remember how this works. We walk out here on Balance of Power on a 2-day countdown. So that means it's going to happen after Thanksgiving. Lawmakers will come back. They will vote on this. But maybe now it doesn't matter. We talked to, by the way, no fan of Matt Gaetz, the congressman from New York, Mike Lawler, Republican, talked to us just ahead of the news of Matt Gaetz dropping out, just to get a sense of where people's heads were. This is a Republican again talking. Here's Congressman Lawler.
President Trump is certainly entitled, as president-elect, to nominate whoever he sees fit to serve in that role. And the Senate obviously has the process by which to confirm. I stand by everything I've ever said about Matt Gaetz. I don't waver in that belief. Do I think he's the right person? No. But ultimately, that will be a decision by the Senate.
Well, not anymore. Let's assemble our political panel. Jeannie Shanzano is with us, Senior Democracy Fellow, Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Democratic analyst. And I'm glad to say that Rick Davis is back with us today, Republican strategist, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and partner at Stone Court Capital. Rick, this was a quick one. I don't know how this compares in history, but the withdrawal came within days of Matt Gaetz being announced. What do you make of this development?
Well, I think the key thing is he withdraws within 24 hours after his meeting in the Senate yesterday. And we can only speculate that it obviously didn't go according to his plan. I think there was plenty of senators, probably more than he would need, to reject his confirmation, express serious reservations about his fitness for office. And I think that he took that literally and didn't want to walk the plank. Senators were saying things like this is going to be much worse than the Kavanaugh hearings, which we all remember were sort of out of control screaming fest. So rather than put himself through that and wind up without a job, I think he's taken the best route and withdrawn. Now, we haven't heard the last of Matt Gaetz. I mean, he withdrew from the House of Representatives last Wednesday, and now he needs a job. So it'll be interesting to see what the Trump team comes up with next.
Does need a job, and I think they're going to need a senator in Florida if Marco Rubio is confirmed as head of the State Department. Jeannie, these must have been some pretty rough meetings yesterday, unless Matt Gaetz got some phone calls last night, or are you among those who think that this whole thing was a setup to begin with to get him out of whatever the ethics committee found in their investigation?
No, I have no evidence to suggest this was a setup. It seems to be in keeping with the way Trump operates. And to me, this entire thing, if it wasn't bad enough, within the last few hours, as we heard, that, he's doing things like transporting women to New York City, going to see Pretty Women on Broadway, the ultimate show and movie about a, hooker with a heart of gold. And he's paying these women on Venmo. I mean, it jumped the shark so long ago, it became outrageous to think he could have survived in this contest, or that Republicans would have wanted to put this thing out in the public. But, Rick is onto something. He needs a job.
We are in for a wild 4 years. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the supplements, improve your health, help support my work. I do get strikes on YouTube. I just received a strike today on episode 26. And so, it's a problem. Please help support me and follow my protocols to improve your health. All right. If you follow what I'm saying, you're going to radically improve your health. Trust me on this. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. The link is in the description of this video and all my videos. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.